Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the regularly scheduled meeting of the Laguna Woods City Council on Wednesday, June 21, 2023. There are going to be a number of opportunities for public comment here today. If you are here in the room and you wish to make a public comment, please fill out a form and give it to the city clerk sitting here. If you are on Zoom, press the raise hand button, and if you're attending by phone, you can press *9 to let us know of your desire to speak to us.
We have 4 members of the public on Zoom currently.
Currently 4, okay.
Yeah.
If you are wanting to talk to us about an item that's not on our agenda, that will come up during item 5. If you want to talk to us about an item that is on our agenda, you will have an opportunity when we get to that item. You are fortunate that you get to see the workings of the City Council because I think most of you are here on an item which is not the first item on our agenda. So you get to sit through that as we do. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councilmember Horn.
Here.
Councilmember McCary.
Here.
Councilmember Moore. Mayor Pro Tem Hatch. And Mayor Connors.
Here. Councilmember McCary, would you lead us in the pledge?
Yes. If everyone would please rise and face the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
First thing on our agenda is item 4.1, which is an update on our public library. As you came in, you noticed it's looking pretty good these days.
And I actually don't have much of an update today except to say that the contractor is continuing to work on their punch list items. They're working on some window repairs, some window installations, and then the planter work, obviously, on the side facing El Toro, but nothing hugely substantive since last we met.
Okay, thank you. We have now time for public comments on non-agenda items, and I have one piece of paper from Bill, who wants to address the council. Come on up to the podium and speak into the microphone, please.
Now? Am I? Oh, okay. Thank you. I did send all the council members a letter last week. I hope you had a chance to see it.
Yes.
It's not news to you. I won't take your time because obviously you're very busy today reviewing what is in the letter. Just a few quick comments. I was here in December. My main focus at that time was safety on El Toro. There have been a number of crashes and so forth, and I've did several conversations with Captain Cruzaldi, and he's assigned more patrols. You can't tell if there's been an improvement in this short a time span, but I think over time, having more enforcement will help. And my current focus is more on quality of life and excessive noise on that road, which is also an ongoing problem. If you don't think so, I'd invite any of you to come over and have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine on my patio, and I think by the time you finish your drink, you'll be satisfied that I'm making a serious point. So my memo essentially made some suggestions, just things I've seen done in other cities. I don't know if they work, but at least they keep doing them, so I assume they work. Shouldn't cost a whole lot of money, but I don't know that. Everything costs too much. But my point, I guess, I'm no expert in traffic, but I am a retired psychologist. And I can tell you that if you want behavior to change, you have to have 1, clear expectations, and 2, consequences for people that don't meet those expectations. We're trying to, the captain is trying to provide more consequences for bad driving, but I think we haven't set the expectations as clearly as we might. You can judge that for yourselves. There are a couple of small signs with speed limit notations, but I think more could be done. I think we'll never totally eliminate noise, but I have a good friend. I lived for over 30 years in the flight path at the Minneapolis-St. Paul Airport. There's some noises you can't control. You can't make less. I have an airline pilot who assures me there's no quiet way to land a large passenger jet. But there are quieter ways to drive. I also provided an indication, not formal survey, but my own little, I walk every day, so I walked along the wall, and I estimate there are at least 200 or more people living immediately on El Toro in Laguna Woods, and I'm sure the noise is traveling beyond the buildings of those who live right on the wall. So I think there are things that can be done. I think the council, the city can set more clear expectations and invest a little more energy in that. And I think the Orange County Sheriff's Department can and I hope will continue to provide good enforcement. I can't provide any consequences, only make suggestions. I guess the only consequence I can offer is I might keep coming back if you don't.
Well, we'd be glad to see
and you
you
may be
anyway.
sick of me already. So, any questions or feedback on what I'm telling you, or yes?
I want to make sure that's on. I've spoken to this because not just on El Toro, there's a change coming on I-5. And we get so used to the noise from tires that we just pass it by and do nothing and think nothing about it until what really will resonate with you is to wear something in your ear like an earbud and you're listening to an iPod or something, and a car goes by and you realize, I can't hear. It's just a car that I'm used to every single day. And you are correct. The faster you go, the more revolutions on the tire and the more noise that you're getting. And so I'm very conscious of what you're saying, and I think we become desensitized to it because we hear it all the time. But I've commented, I get up early in the morning, and during the time when the speed is high, because more people haven't gotten on the I-5, you cannot believe that I am past gate 10, even over towards the edge of our property, which is on Bahia Blanca, and I can hear the traffic on I-5. And so think about the people who are living along there. I'm bringing this up because I'm trying to emphasize that we're talking about making changes to I-5. That is noise. You have to be aware of it, and it's damaging to your ears, very definitely, particularly when it's at higher speeds. Thank you for bringing this up.
And some noise can't be prevented, but we've had drag races. We have people that are making noise on purpose. I don't know why. They're driving cars and motorcycles. They must be over 10 years old. I don't know what the thrill is about making a lot of noise with your vehicle, but some people appear to be enthused about doing that. And that can be eliminated. I also, like you, can pretty much tune out the background noise. We live with ambulances. Someday they'll be coming for me. I don't mind the noise. But there are other things that could be done to make things quieter. And there are hundreds of people just in that short strip. And I know there are other places that are also densely populated within Laguna Woods. But anything else?
Thank you.
Well, thank you
for
very
coming
much for
to
hearing
bring
me.
it again to our attention. Rise it to the top of the.
Appreciate your time.
Thank
you. You might. I don't do anything on Wednesday afternoon.
Thank you. The next item is the consent calendar. All items on the consent calendar are considered routine and they're passed by one vote, unless somebody in the public or the staff or the council wants to remove it for special discussion and consideration. Is there anybody that wants to take anything off the consent calendar? Are you good with the consent calendar? Okay. Do you want to move it?
Let me make it very clear, I'm clean. It has been 12 days now. It has been 12 days since my wife and I contracted COVID for the first time after thousands of injections not to get it. So it was 12 days ago when I first got my symptoms. The temperature's gone, the voice is gone, everything is gone now. So don't be afraid. I'm not catchy. I'll move the consent calendar.
Second.
Okay, all in favor of the consent calendar?
Aye.
Aye.
That is unanimous. Now we have item 7.1, a public hearing on a conditional use permit for office space in a commercial center. Can we have a report from staff, please?
Yes, absolutely. So this is a conditional use permit related to an inline unit in the Willow Tree Center, which sits directly adjacent to City Hall. If you take a look at the map on the screen, the large white building in the middle there, that's the building that houses Aldi, Anytime Fitness, and Dollar Tree. The unit that we're talking about today is Unit C2. It's roughly located where the star is. The city, received an application from 19 Architecture on behalf of Alignment Healthcare, looking to lease this space. They're looking to establish an administrative professional office within that existing building. This is a little bit atypical. This is actually the first time that we've processed a conditional use permit under this particular section of the code. But essentially what the municipal code provides for is that in the community commercial district, which is the zoning district that the Willow Tree Center is located in, administrative professional offices are permitted as a by right use if they are under 3,000 square feet. If they are over 3,000 square feet, they require a conditional use permit. Unit C2 happens to be 3,272 square feet, pushing them into conditional use permit territory. From staff's perspective, this is very straightforward. They're not proposing any exterior modifications. All of their signage would follow the sign program for the Willow Tree Center that the City Council previously approved. So this is really just a use moving into the building. The proposed conditions of approval were intended to regulate the use in a manner that complies with the commercial zoning regulations in the municipal code. And as with most of our land use entitlements, if the City Council adopts this action, the proposed approvals and actions would apply to both the current applicant, which is Alignment Health, as well as eligible successors at that location. The sequence of events today, there's an opportunity for a public hearing, any public testimony to be received. Once the City Council closes that public hearing, staff's recommendation is that a resolution be adopted titled A Resolution of the City Council of the City of Laguna Woods, California, approving conditional use permit CUP-2023-0002 to allow for the establishment of an administrative professional office within an existing 3,272 square foot unit in an existing building at 24310 Moulton Parkway, Suite C2, Laguna Woods, California 92637, and determining and certifying that the conditional use permit is categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to Section 15301 of Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations. That concludes my staff report.
I'm glad we're only doing our resolutions by title. That title was plenty long enough. I'm going to start by opening the public hearing, and one person has already indicated a desire to speak, John Sanchez of AHP. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mayor, Council. I'm just here representing Alignment Healthcare. I actually brought renderings for you to see the sign that's going to be out front. I also brought renderings of the interior. It's basically going to be a professional office building. For actually our CEO lives down here, so it's a closer commute for him. He can just do team meetings in there and stuff like that. So, any questions for me or?
Is this, are there going to be members or applicants for AHP coming into this office for information or enrollment?
Yes, existing members will be allowed to come in as a resource center to, change their plan if they wanted to, or, learn more about their benefits and stuff. So,
Okay.
But yeah.
Thank you.
So you'll get some good foot traffic, hopefully.
Well, it'll come up later that we have an interest in providing quality goods and services for our residents.
Yeah.
And in this shopping center, as long as your office is a forward-facing office, a public-facing office, and not just an office.
No, we will help the
find
membership
that
here, of
helpful.
course. So yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to comment? Do we have any commenters by phone or Zoom?
No.
Okay. Public hearing is closed. Does any member of the council have anything to add?
No,
Okay. Will someone move the resolution?
I move the resolution.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
That is unanimous. Come now to 7.2, which is the sign program for the new Starbucks where Jack in the Box used to be. And once again, we'll take a presentation from our city manager.
Sure. So the City Council previously approved a site development permit related to a new Starbucks at the former Jack in the Box location in the public storage shopping center located at the intersection of Ridge Route Drive and Moulton Parkway. In this case, the applicant is Sign Industries Incorporated. They've submitted the application on behalf of Starbucks. This is for the signage on the building. So again, the building's already been approved. The signage is what's at issue today. There are some renderings in the actual proposed sign program in your agenda packet, but I wanted to walk through the wall signs and the monument signs specifically. These will be the more visible of the signs. The signage, just for a point of comparison, is really substantially similar in type to the signage that was installed at the drive-through Starbucks at the corner of Moulton Parkway and El Toro Road. So there are 3 tower elements on this property. These are the kind of brownish features shown here. Each of those tower elements is proposed to have signage. You see 2 of the elevations here. These are the lengthwise elevations. The top one is facing the interior of the center, and then the rendering at the bottom is the view from Moulton Parkway as you're traveling northbound on Moulton Parkway. So you can see on the top rendering, you have the front doors under that logo sign, and on the bottom rendering where that car image is, that's the drive-through pickup window with signage over it as well. On the short sides of the building, again, there's a tower element on the side of the building that faces Ridge Route Drive, so it's looking across at Via Reservoir. That's the picture on top, or the rendering on top. And then the other rendering at the bottom, that is the view if you're traveling northbound on Moulton Parkway. That's the first view that you see kind of adjacent to the main driveway into that shopping center from Moulton Parkway. There's no signage proposed for that elevation, and there's also no tower element, although you can see they have kind of a equivalently themed faux wood facade on a door on that elevation. There's a new monument sign proposed. So top right of the image on the screen, you can see the monument sign that used to be there for Jack in the Box. Starbucks is planning to remove that sign and construct a sign that again looks substantially similar to the drive-through monument sign located here at the Starbucks at Moulton and El Toro. It would have a wood facade that matches the faux wood facade on the building itself, and include, again, similar logo and text-based signage. In addition, there's a host of signage that I would generally characterize as drive-through signage. So we talked at a previous meeting that at this location, there will be 2 drive-through queuing lanes that merge down to a single drive-through lane prior to that pickup window. There's a variety of signage related to that. So signage intended to help people navigate which lanes are open, what they're supposed to do when they get to the merge point. There's obviously also then 2 of everything. There's 2 of those pre-menu board signs and 2 of those the drive-through kind of yield merge type signage. They've also proposed mobile order parking signs for the parking lot. Those are meant to be quick stop locations where somebody can drive up, park their car, walk inside for just a moment or 2, pick up their coffee, and then leave the site shortly thereafter. All of those, there's renderings and dimensions and standards included in that proposed sign program in your agenda packet. Again, there's conditions of approval included that we feel would regulate the use consistent with the commercial zoning standards and signage standards as well. And the signage, like we talked about just a moment ago, if you adopt the proposed resolution today, Those approvals would extend to the current applicant, which is Starbucks, and then also to eligible successors at that project location. So the format again for today is there's an opportunity for a public hearing and any public testimony once the City Council closes that public hearing. Our recommendation is that a resolution be adopted titled "A Resolution of the City Council of the City of Laguna Woods, California, approving sign program SP-2023-0003 to allow for various signage at 23562 Moulton Parkway, Laguna Woods, California, 92637, and determining and certifying that the sign program is categorically exempt from the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to Section 15311 of Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations." And with that, I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
Thank you. The next thing we're going to do is open the public hearing, and I wondered if there was a representative from the applicant here today. Apparently not, but this is a pretty straightforward sign program. Is there anyone from the public who wants to address us regarding these signs? Okay, anybody online or phone?
No.
Okay, public hearing is closed. Any comments from members of the council?
If you notice, how many businesses in our city are related to coffee or to health?
Well, I just figure we lost our Starbucks to Gate 7, but now we're getting another one. And as long as we have 3 Starbucks and a Coffee Bean, I figure we're a happening place. So,
Don't forget Reborn Coffee. Plenty of
Reborn
options.
coffee as well, that's right. But takes all that caffeine to keep us going. Okay, does anybody want to, can I get someone to move the resolution?
I'll move the resolution.
Second?
I'll second.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? That is unanimous. Well, moving right along. We're coming to the annual fee study that we conduct each year to make sure that our fees are in line with our costs and nothing exceeds our cost, but that we're not giving services away that we can't afford to give away. Mr. City Manager, would you give us a report, please?
Yes, I'd be happy to. So as you just alluded to, this is an activity that the city goes through every year to take a look at the adequacy and rationality of the fees that we charge for various permit-based services. State law is pretty prescriptive in how cities can set fees, but the bottom line is that the city is only able to recover its reasonable cost of providing services. In order to calculate that reasonable cost on an annual basis, we retain an independent third party to take a look at our fees, take a look at our costs for providing those services, and essentially come up with calculations identifying the amounts that would need to be charged in order for the city to break even. This is not a revenue generating, like a profit generating exercise for us. This is simply an opportunity for us to create a nexus between the fees that we charge and the actual expenses paid out by the city to provide those services. I do want to note that that fee study, there's no expectation of what it might uncover. Some years the results have been strikingly different than other years, but that fee study is prepared for a flat fee. There's no correlation to the findings that come out of it. In general, staff's recommendation for many years now has been that the City Council establish fees at those reasonable costs for providing services. There are some fees where state law limits what the city is able to charge. So if you had a chance to peruse the fee study, you'll note that there are some fees that the city's costs are calculated at pretty significantly in excess of the charge that we actually carry through to the consumer. That is a product of state law saying a maximum charge for instance, certain types of solar panel installations is X dollars. The reason that we recommend establishing fees at our reasonable cost of providing services is quite simply that when we don't, it effectively means that subsidies are borne by other Laguna Woods taxpayers. Most of the city's money comes from sales tax, property tax, taxes that are paid by residents in this community or customers patronizing businesses in this community. And so if our reasonable cost is X, but we charge some lesser amount, the difference between those two amounts is still a cost to the city. We're just using some other type of revenue to cover that gap. I want to be very clear before I turn it over to our consultant here that nothing we're talking about today creates new permit requirements. Only existing fees for existing permits and proposed fees for existing permit requirements are before you for consideration today. I also want to just take an opportunity while we have an audience to remind everyone that state law requires the city to enforce the California Building Standards Code. This is a statewide standards code. It's not unique to Laguna Woods in any way, and the city has not adopted any requirements that are more stringent than state law, except as recommended by the Orange County Fire Authority related to the California Fire Code. It's also worth noting that even if the city wasn't a city, even if Laguna Woods was still an unincorporated area, the same permit requirements would still exist. The difference would be the County of Orange would be the permit issuing agency, and Laguna Woods residents would be required to travel to Santa Ana to get those permits instead of getting them here at City Hall. And then finally, HOAs have their own requirements. Obviously, in Laguna Woods Village, there are manner alterations requirements related to things residents can and cannot do to their manners. In addition, there are requirements for Laguna Woods Village residents to obtain certain types of consents for manner alterations from their HOAs. Those requirements are in addition to what the city is required to do under state law. They're not a substitute in any way for the California Building Standards Code, which is, again, what we are focusing on here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Terry Madsen with ClearSource Financial Consulting, the firm that we retained to perform the fee study itself. Terry's joining us via Zoom today, but Terry's going to walk you through both what he did in this study and then some of the high-level findings of it as well. So take it away, Terry.
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, Mayor and members of the City Council, for allowing me to participate on this topic with you today. As a reminder, my name is Terry Madsen, and I'm here from ClearSource Financial Consulting, and we help the city each year with its annual cost of service update, and we work with communities throughout the state providing similar services. Your study revolves around examining the cost of providing building, planning, encroachment permitting, and grading permit services. So what we would think of as development-related services or alteration type construction services. We do calculate the full cost of service, and then that full cost of service is used to help inform targeted discussions around cost recovery objectives, as Chris described earlier in this presentation. As part of our work, we prepare what is called the Central Service Cost Allocation Plan. That is an informer of the cost of service. It allocates a share of human resources costs, information technology costs, city administrative costs into the cost of providing these direct outward-facing services to the community. And so that's part of our work. And then ultimately, our deliverables include the fee study that's part of this agenda packet and a fee schedule that comes before the City Council each year for consideration. As a reminder, the services that are listed in the fee schedule, the common underlying component is that they are service-based fees, so they are driven by labor in some form, either your own in-house city resources or contract service provider labor that you use to conduct permit inspections, plan reviews, permit issuance activities, those kind of entitlement reviews for compliance with zoning code, those kind of activities. So these are service-based fees. We identify an hourly cost of providing service, and then we walk through on a service-by-service basis and understand how long does it typically require to perform these various services. So you have minor services that require less intensive effort from your city staff, and they would have a lower cost of service and consequently a lower fee. If something's more intensive in nature and requires multiple inspections, it would have a higher cost of service and a higher fee. Next slide. Chris walked through this briefly earlier in the presentation, but our first objective is to identify what does it cost to provide the service. We identify that as a full cost of service. That represents your ceiling. Because these are fees and not taxes, we don't want to exceed our cost of providing service. And if we adopt a fee less than full cost of service, the city still incurs the cost. You're just using some other city resource to cover it. So if I remodel my kitchen, but we didn't recover the costs of permitting and plan check from me as the remodeler and beneficiary of that remodel, then the other residents and businesses of Laguna Woods would cover that variance. Next slide. Because Laguna Woods has actively managed these fees over the last several years, the proposed updates are relatively minimal. They just correspond to your recent adjustments in contract services and underlying cost of service. So what we see at a macro level is that your building fees are typically proposed to increase by about 2%. And the primary driver of that 2% adjustment is an underlying adjustment in your contract service costs. So you contract for building official services, building inspection services, some plan review services. As those costs change, the cost of providing building services follows those cost changes. It's important to note that there are no new permit requirements created as a result of this study. So what's happening is recalibration of existing fees for services. On planning fees, a very minor adjustment as well. We see about a 1% increase for most of your fixed fee services. Your larger scale planning projects are collected on a deposit basis. And so the applicant would just be billed for the time and materials associated with processing the prospective application. And then for encroachment permit fees, you again contract for encroachment permit services and engineering related services. Those fees are proposed to adjust by about 2%. And then grading are deposits, and there is no change to the initial deposit amount. If a project these are time and materials billing. So if there's leftover deposits, the applicant will be refunded, and if additional resources needed, the applicant will cover the cost of the difference between the initial deposit and the actual cost to the city. Next slide.
Next slide is back to me. As was the case with the last two items, there's an opportunity for a public hearing today. Once that public testimony is received, we would recommend that you close the public hearing and adopt a resolution titled A Resolution of the City Council of the City of Laguna Woods, California, adopting new and increased or modified building and planning services fees and encroachment and grading permit fees, and determining and certifying that this action is not subject to the California Environmental Quality Act pursuant to Title 14 of the California Code of Regulations. One of the things that state law is specific about is that when the City Council changes these type of fees, the new fees cannot go into effect any sooner than 60 days from the date of adoption. So we're recommending an adoption date of August 21st, 2023. As we've done in the past, we try to get to the start of a week, so that's a Monday, that those fees would take effect. And with that, I will turn it back over to the mayor.
We have time for a public hearing here. Is there anybody here who wants to talk to us about these building fees? Have a hand? If you want to discuss it, please come up to the microphone.
Good afternoon. My name's Mark Nussbaum, and I just had the air mover part of my HVAC system installed in my manor. That's the part that goes up in the attic. It was for take out the old one, put a new one in. That's all that was done. I ended up paying for permits 17% of the cost of what the air conditioner was. that seemed a little excessive. And the second part of my question is there any effort to make sure there's no redundancy between the HOA fees and the city fees? Because it seems like the inspections are duplicates.
I'm going to let our city manager respond to the second part, actually the first part and the second part. Perhaps you can.
The first part, if you would do me a favor before you leave, if you would connect with Rebecca, I'd like to take a look at the building permit in question. I obviously don't have those details in front of me, but I appreciate the information. The second part, as far as redundancy, so again, what the HOAs do versus what the city do, it's very, very different. It may look and feel similar, but HOAs are focused on compliance with standards that they create. So they have their own design guidelines, their own equipment requirements. They're inspecting, quote unquote, your property for that and issuing a consent for manner alteration for that purpose. The city is doing the same thing that cities everywhere do, which is enforce the California Building Standards Code, which is looking at things like safety, the integrity of the structure. We're looking at the actual construction side of it. We're not as focused on things like whether it meets a certain design standard for a certain type of building. And so they are very different requirements, but I acknowledge that we hear this all the time, that they look and feel similar because your HOA requires a permit-like device in order to start construction, and we require a permit on our side, but I can assure you they're very, very different things that we're looking at.
One other add-on that was a little frustrating. It seemed like the HOA rules were counter to what the contractor's rules were. In other words, the contractor was requiring me to have the HOA approved first, where the HOA was asking me to have the city approved first, and what I had to sign off is the HOA. So they were in total, well, what do I do? Who goes first? Who pays first? At the end of the day, it got done, but what I was signing up as a homeowner was saying that I assume all liability, and the contractor assumes all liability. The HOA was assuming no liability for anything. Just a very frustrating process. Sure.
Is it Mark Nussbaum?
It is.
Okay, Mark. I guess I have a question. Why we could not provide the approval first, because I think it is logical. The city, reminding what our city manager said, we don't make any of these rules. They come from the state. And our job as a city is to enforce state laws. And so we enforce state laws. We don't make them, we enforce them. And they're usually based on safety, so having to do with buildings. It makes sense to me that the city would approve first, because if the city approves, this is the only truly legal that you must meet. The other is a condition that the HOA created, and it could be having to do with architectural, board rules, all kinds of things. So my question is there some way that, I think you have a very good point.
Yeah, so in general, the reason that HOA approvals are required first, like in the case of this improvement, that HVAC unit extends into common areas. And so we need consent from the property owner, and the way that the HOAs have chosen to provide consent is through their consent for manner alteration process. So it's really a function of how they're providing the city with notice that a permit can be pulled for a location. It doesn't have to be that way, but again, it's kind of whatever the system is that they define over there, the city needs to know that we're not issuing a permit for property that doesn't belong to somebody.
I think there's a hand
Did
here.
that answer your question?
Here's one.
I understand that part of it, and I agree with what you're saying. In this case, what I presented was for something that's not in the open area. It's in my attic.
Yeah, your roof,
not
your
common
attic
area.
is still common area, I think, because you only own
really?
from the paint and the drywall inside of your unit.
Okay, that answers the question.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Uh-huh. Is there another comment? Here.
Is there, Chris, or are there disagreements frequently or infrequently between our inspectors and the HOAs?
No.
On what, how smooth is that?
I mean, because we're dealing with different things, it's relatively uncommon for there to be a disagreement between inspectors. They're looking at one set of standards, we're inspecting for different reasons, so we don't really see conflict in that regard.
Are the increases that we have every other year or however often, is there a standard that we're judged against as to the cost for our services, i.e. the perfect inspector and how long he would take or she would take to do their job?
Yeah, I think there's different components. Terry touched on this briefly, but one of the components is time.
Yeah.
And so certainly I think when you look at the time estimates that are built in, those are probably pretty comparable to what you're seeing. What causes variation in fees, the reason that every city and every county has different fees is we all have a different amount of overhead funneling down into that. We all have a different kind of hourly rate for that time. So even if, let's say, an inspection takes 15 minutes, an inspection that takes 15 minutes in Laguna Woods might cost different than an inspection that takes 15 minutes in Laguna Hills. And it's a product of both what we pay for those direct services, but also everything else that gets layered into those fees.
So there is a standard out there against which we are judging our own performance?
I think in terms of time, certainly there's a kind of a reasonable standard that when we go, each fee has a calculation attached to it that has times for permit issuance, times for plan review, times for inspection. It would be very easy for us to see if there were strange outliers in that. Almost everything is within, an inspection takes a finite period of time. Obviously, there are more complicated inspections than others, but on that time piece, I would say that there is a standard.
So are these at all a cost of living adjustment upward? Simply because it costs more to do business these days?
I wouldn't say it's a cost of living adjustment per se, but because we contract for the majority of the personnel providing these services, we have several contracts, but the main contract for those services includes a 4% cost escalator a year. And so that is the primary driver of what is increasing these fees. But because there are other things included in it and other factors that we consider, that 4% increase in the contract service fee doesn't mean that fees go up by 4%.
No.
It means we're closer to 2% on average.
Yeah, and so we do look carefully, though, that we are reasonable in whatever increases are, because our people are very efficient in doing their job in a proper fashion.
We definitely, from staff's perspective, it's in everybody's best interest to get the job done as quickly as possible. So I would say that's certainly something that we focus on. I would also point out that, I don't know if it was our last meeting or the one before it, but one of the things that we intend on doing over the next budget cycle is taking a look at whether it makes sense to bring some of these services in-house again instead of contracting for them, and then consequently seeing what impact that would have on building fees. Whether or not it reduces fees, I can't tell you right now, but I do think that there's a high likelihood that potentially over time it would help to manage fees or smooth fees over time.
All right, good, thank you.
One thing I will point out is that the hourly contract rate is increased by the amount of overhead that our building department consumes for our city staff. So we have a comptroller who pays the contractor. We have receptionists who welcome applicants when they come in. We have the cost of our space. We have all those other things which come into the burdened rate for each hour spent in reviewing a plan. But I should note that our percent of overhead was 41% in the 2015-16 year, and it's gone down to 26% right now. So we are being very frugal and conservative in adding to this burdened rate, and that helps keep the increase down. Okay, are there any other comments from the public?
I'll move it.
Okay. Any other, you seconded? Any other comments from the council?
I do have a comment. I'm in total agreement with the city manager's proposal to look at bringing this inside. Our fees are higher than our neighboring cities for these same permits. And I am very sympathetic. It's frustrating to think you buy something and then you pay so much more to have it installed. I share your frustration, and I think to look more closely at bringing this back in is something that we need to put a lot of emphasis on it, because we are higher than the other fees nearby. And having this go up, I understand when you have a contractor that we have an obligation. We cannot, the city should not take this and subsidize it. It has to pay for itself. I certainly support that, but I think a closer look at bringing this back in is certainly a way that we should be looking. Thank you.
Okay, all in favor of this resolution?
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, that is unanimous. Okay, now we come to what you have all been waiting for, the cannabis retail sales business regulations. There will be ample opportunity for people who want to comment. I would request, as many of you have done, that if you wish to speak to this, feel free to fill out one of these forms and give it to our city clerk. If you are on Zoom, raise your hand, and if you are on the phone, press *9. I'm going to just call these out, which I think are probably in the order in which they were received. Is that true, Madam Clerk? Did you hand this to me with the, okay.
Do you want to have the staff report first?
Oh, yeah, we'd like to have the staff report first.
All right. And we do have several people joining us online who have already raised their hands, so we can take those when we get to public comment as well. I just want to let the remote viewing audience know that I see the hands. All right, so by way of background, we are here today because in January, the City Council directed staff to do two things: to draft an ordinance for consideration that would potentially prospectively authorize the operation of cannabis storefront retailers, and also draft a resolution for future consideration that would establish the rate of the cannabis business tax. That cannabis business tax, of course, was authorized by Measure T in November, but it provided authority for the City Council to set the cannabis business tax rate between a certain range. The direction that staff was provided with in January was to set it at the higher of 10% of gross receipts, or $35 per square foot, which represents the current maximum that is allowable under Measure T. So we have done exactly that. We've prepared the requested ordinance and submitted it to the City Council. It's included as Attachment A in the agenda packet today for this item 8.1. I want to note that while there was direction to prepare both an ordinance and a resolution, staff's recommendation is that you, if you're going to go down this route, that you adopt a single consolidated ordinance covering both the business tax rate and the cannabis business regulations. So you'll note in that Attachment A that there's a section towards the end that relates to the cannabis business tax rate. That certainly can be separated out into a separate ordinance, but when we sat down to actually do this work, we decided that it would be clearer for people if all of the information was in a single spot, as opposed to scattered amongst several documents. The ordinance before you today is a draft. It's labeled as such. I would encourage you to treat it as such. We are specifically interested today in any feedback or direction that the City Council wants to provide us on that ordinance. We are still taking a look at some best practices and taking a look at local needs. I expect that we'll hear comments today from the public, which we'll also be considering. And we are talking with the Sheriff's Department about their specific safety-related concerns and how we might be able to address some of those concerns proactively in an ordinance. So to the extent that the City Council elects to proceed with consideration of this ordinance, I would say that it is almost a certainty that the next time you see this ordinance, it'll include a second set of red lines, which we'll provide to you separately, that just have a bit of fine tuning and additional massaging of those regulations. As we mentioned in the staff report, staff continues to recommend that the City Council consider allowing storefront retailers if and when cannabis is reclassified on the Federal Controlled Substances Act. We recognize that there are any number of reasons that you're considering this item today. We certainly respect that, and we're prepared to do what the City Council directs. But nonetheless, our recommendation is that you wait until there's federal action on this matter. In addition to that, I do want to point out for the record again that the Sheriff's Department remains strongly opposed to allowing cannabis storefront retailers. That position hasn't changed. So as we sat down to draft the ordinance before you today, we started by trying to identify what it is that we were attempting to accomplish. And so I just want to walk you through some of our thinking, and then I'll get into a little more of the nuts and bolts of the ordinance. But a couple of the things that were really important to us is that the ordinance be as objective as possible. We were looking to create clear requirements that apply equally to all retailers. And in doing so, we were looking to avoid subjective screening. Some cannabis ordinances in other cities attempt to characterize when a particular retailer has more merit than another retailer and provide preference to those retailers. We really tried to distill the regulatory approach to something that was objective and even-handed across all prospective retailers. We've included, as we'll talk about in a moment, really robust operations requirements. These operations requirements cover a range of topics, including safety, and they're based on both our assessment of local needs, things that we want to be mindful of in this community, and also on best practices. One of the realities considering this today versus in 2017 when the City Council had its last substantive discussion on the subject, or 2007, 2008 when the City Council actually talked about an ordinance that was on the books to allow dispensaries or storefront retailers. The difference today is that there are cities and counties out here that are doing this, and so we were able to look at how they're regulating this industry and pull from those ordinances things that made sense for us. So in your agenda report, you'll note that 39% of cities and counties in California currently allow cannabis retail activity of some kind. We have looked at many of those, including all of the ordinances that exist in Orange County, to attempt to distill our own operations requirements that are appropriate to Laguna Woods. In terms of location, which we'll also talk about a little bit more in a moment, it was obviously a goal of ours to avoid locating retailers near sensitive uses. The state already has some sensitive use requirements that apply statewide related to distances from schools and daycares and youth centers. We've identified additional sensitive uses that we recommend being mindful of locating retailers near. We also wanted to avoid an undue concentration of retailers in any particular area. So to the extent that storefront retailers are permitted, we think it makes sense to permit them with some space requirements between those retailers to avoid multiple retailers in a row or multiple retailers in a single shopping center. We're also, this is a topic the City Council is well aware of, but state housing laws have changed dramatically in the last several years. We've tried to be careful about drafting this ordinance in a way that avoids potential conflicts with state housing laws. I'll talk more about that in a moment. We did have an interest in ensuring that to the extent retailers open in Laguna Woods, that they are experienced in complying with state law. The state regulatory framework has been in place for several years. We have included some ownership requirements that seek to ensure that the retailers that establish themselves in Laguna Woods, again, to the extent that they do, are not doing it for the first time, that they have some track record of compliance with state law. And then finally, we were looking to avoid undue duplication of state licensing requirements. The state has a very robust licensing framework for cannabis businesses, and so things like background checks, the state background checks people on an annual basis for their annual licensing permits. We tried to not duplicate those where it made sense to do so. So in talking about the structure of the draft ordinance, there are 9 sections in this ordinance, ranging from kind of introductory matters, talking about purpose and intent and providing some definitions for terms used in the ordinance, to some specific detail on the city's permit requirements, some affirmative statements related to the state's licensing requirements, and then probably where the ordinance spends the bulk of its time is talking about where storefront retailers can be located, and if they're located there, what operations requirements they would be required to follow. As I mentioned, the business tax rate is also included in this draft ordinance. There's a section on violations and penalties, and then there's a section on staff's authority to interpret and implement the ordinance. And again, this is in draft form, so to the extent that there's feedback on these, we're certainly happy to hear that today. So I wanted to talk about location requirements for a moment, and I've tried to distill what is pages of detail in the ordinance into a hopefully somewhat easier to digest table. What you're seeing on the screen are a number of factors that we consider in location requirements and the answers to these questions that would be required in order for it to be deemed a potentially eligible site for a cannabis storefront retailer. To start with, we have required that the only areas that storefront retailers be located is in areas designated as commercial in the general plan, and then more specifically, areas that are zoned either community commercial or professional administrative office in the zoning code. We've included a requirement that if a parcel's size or boundaries have changed in the past year, that even if it meets all of the other criteria, it doesn't become eligible as a site until that year has elapsed. That's intended to prevent modifications to parcels just to circumvent parcel-based distance requirements that are included in the ordinance. We've required that to the extent a storefront retailer establishes itself, that there be no non-conforming uses or structures on site. This would be essentially anything that is either legal non-conforming or just an outright illegal use or structure on the site. It's an opportunity to bring these sites into full compliance with the code. We've included a requirement to require that access be taken exclusively from streets that are under the majority control of the city. This is, so if you think of Laguna Woods, in general, our public streets are El Toro Road, Moulton Parkway, Santa Maria Avenue, and Ridge Route Drive. That doesn't mean, though, that the totality of those streets are located in Laguna Woods. For instance, a very small portion of Ridge Route Drive is within Laguna Woods. I think we talked about this actually briefly at the last meeting, but the middle of Santa Maria is not in Laguna Woods. And then streets that residents might associate with Laguna Woods, like Paseo de Valencia, the entirety of that is in Laguna Hills. That's not at all in Laguna Woods, even though Laguna Woods shopping centers are located off of it. So we've required that to the extent that a site has access from public streets, that it be accessible majority from city public streets as opposed to taking access, say, primarily from a street in the city of Laguna Hills. If a site includes housing units, we've determined or we've recommended that it be ineligible for cannabis storefront retailers. And then this is where we get to the state housing law implications. If a site is located on a parcel that is identified in the city's general plan housing element as a potential future site for the development of either low income, very low income, or moderate income housing, we've recommended that those sites be removed from consideration and not be eligible for cannabis storefront retailer establishment. And that's primarily to avoid a situation where the city ends up running into conflict with the state's no net loss law, which requires us to maintain sufficient zoning to accommodate our housing needs assessment. It does eliminate a fair number of sites, but I think in the greater scheme of things, balancing competing priorities, I wouldn't want the city to adopt a set of regulations related to cannabis storefront retailers that just causes a problem for us on the affordable housing side. And then in terms of sensitive uses, we've also included language that requires cannabis storefront retailers to be located at least 600 feet away from other storefront retailers, but also alcoholism or drug abuse recovery or treatment facilities, daycare centers, permanent supportive housing, public libraries, public recreation facilities, and schools. The measurement for the 600 feet is from the parcel's boundary lines. So it's not a door-to-door measurement. It's not as you're driving on a road. It is from one parcel to another. The thinking here is that, to start with, the state already includes a 600-foot requirement related to daycares, schools, and youth centers. We've taken that same 600 feet because there's a basis for it in state law and applied it to things like drug abuse recovery facilities that are probably best not located near cannabis storefront retailers. And again, to avoid a proliferation of storefront retailers, we've encouraged the council to apply that 600-foot separation requirement between those parcels that accommodate cannabis retailers. Now, in addition to those requirements, let's say, and I'm just going to go back for a second, let's say you answer all of these questions correctly. You score them as they are in the right two columns. There are still additional location requirements. Any parcel that falls subject to these requirements is either going to be a single occupant parcel or a multi-occupant parcel. On parcels where there's only one applicant, or only one occupant, so in other words, a parcel where the only business that's operating is a cannabis storefront retailer, those would be permitted to operate there either if they're the property owner or if they're just leasing or renting space from a property owner. On parcels where there are multiple uses, so think of this as like a shopping center or an office building with multiple suites in it, or even just a parcel that has multiple standalone buildings on it. On those parcels, cannabis storefront retailers would be permitted, but they would only be permitted if they're also the property owner of that parcel. This requirement is intended to both assist with enforcement and also with quality of life. So it's obviously easier for us if the property ownership is the cannabis retailer itself. It's one party to deal with on enforcement matters. But to the extent that a cannabis retailer is sharing space or sharing facilities of some kind with other businesses, we also think that it is more reasonable to expect that those businesses would amicably coexist if the property owner, i.e. the party that hires the leasing agent that signs those businesses to those leases, is the cannabis retailer itself, so that there is no surprise who operates in that building. Now, in addition to that, on those multi-tenant sites, we would still require that those sensitive uses that we required at least 600-foot separation from, we would require that those not be located on the property. So the first several bullets there, those are the 7 sensitive uses, and then the other requirement is that none of the other uses on that parcel can sell alcoholic beverages. And then finally, in terms of location requirements, I wanted to note that obviously conditions change. So I'm just talking about this moment in time, but based on the criteria that I just outlined and taking a look at what currently exists in the city, we have identified that there are at least 6 parcels in the city that it would be potentially possible to establish a cannabis storefront retailer on. We've organized them into 2 columns here because, again, that 600-foot separation requirement between dispensaries would apply. But essentially, there would be up to 2 storefront retailers permitted in the Home Depot Center, specifically on the east side of that center where you have the Home Depot building itself, Rite Aid, Sabrasada, and US Bank. The reason it's up to 2, Home Depot is actually 2 parcels. There are some parcels on this list that you could get a 600-foot separation from, but it would be either 1 or 2 from that first column, and then 1 from the second column, the Helm Center or the McCormick and Son Mortuary. Again, these uses are directly adjacent to each other, so because of the proposed 600-foot separation requirement, just like all 4 of the sites on the first column could not be developed simultaneously as storefront retailers, both of the sites on the second column couldn't be developed simultaneously as storefront retailers. Even though these buildings have existing uses in them, again, I want to point out that We're talking about parcels. So parcels have parking lots. It's conceivable in some of these instances that either new buildings could be constructed or existing buildings could be repurposed for cannabis storefront retailers. That ends up being a discussion between property owners and the prospective storefront retailer. So I would encourage you not to get too bogged down in the particulars of these sites, just to say that they meet the requirements that we just talked about in the previous slides. The number of sites, though, could very well change, and we expect that it would over time. Some of the primary factors that are resulting in only these sites currently being viewed as potentially eligible have to do with the proximity of daycares and schools. While we don't have a public school in Laguna Woods, we do have schools and daycare facilities that are licensed by the state, schools licensed by the California Department of Education, and daycares licensed by the California Department of Social Services that would trigger that 600-foot separation requirement from those parcels. So several of the churches in the community, for instance, have daycares on their properties. That would create a 600-foot buffer around not just that daycare building, but the parcel on which it's located. But those daycares obviously open and close. We've seen that in our history since the city's been incorporated in 1999, that those uses have come and gone over time. To the extent that they were to come and go, that would increase or potentially change the sites that are potentially eligible for cannabis storefront retailers. Conversely, if you had an influx of daycares or an influx of any of those other sensitive uses, that would create new 600-foot buffers that might crowd out sites that are currently viewed as potentially able to be permitted. The City Council would, as with anything in this ordinance, retain the ability to modify these location requirements in the future. But I want to point out that changing the location requirements is not something that would then immediately cause an established cannabis dispensary or storefront retailer to shut down. So I do want you to be mindful of the location requirements and recognize that to the extent that you open the door, you are opening the door for some likely extended period of time on these properties. Switching gears slightly, I want to talk about ownership for a moment. So we have two key requirements in the draft ordinance that relate to ownership. The first is intended to ensure that one person is clearly in control of that storefront retailer for both the purposes of the city's permitting process, but also for any subsequent enforcement purposes that become necessary. So we've required that to make sure somebody is clearly in control of it, that at least 51%, a majority of that business, be owned by a single person. They can certainly have multiple owners, but there needs to be a majority owner so that we have a person we can go to who clearly controls that operation. And then, as I mentioned earlier, to ensure that dispensaries that established in the city have a demonstrated level of familiarity operating in compliance with state law, we have included a requirement that would ensure that at least 50% of the business be owned by persons with at least 2 years of experience owning another cannabis storefront retailer or multiple that have been licensed by the state for that 2-year period without suspension or revocation of those licenses. So this is meant to ensure that, again, it isn't somebody's first try at complying with state law, that they have some demonstrated track record of complying with the Department of Cannabis Control's requirements. I mentioned that there's a robust set of operations requirements in the ordinance. There are, in fact, 23 different topics addressed in the draft ordinance. I've listed them on the screen. I'm not going to walk through each of them, but I wanted to assure people that as we've looked at what other cities are doing, as we've looked at best practices in the industry, we have identified at least 23 areas. And again, this is an area where we're still refining it a bit, but 23 subject areas that we wanted to make sure that we included clear requirements that, again, apply evenly across any prospective retailer who sets up shop. This relates to some of the same things that are covered in state law, things like a storefront retailer's inability to sell alcoholic beverages on site or tobacco cigarettes, hours of operation, design requirements for the buildings itself and for other facilities on the property, odor control, parking, security measures. I mean, it gets down to graffiti, to events that they might choose to hold. It includes a prohibition on drive-through facilities, which is again a prohibition that's also contained in state law. Talks about how to ensure that minors are not on the property or purchasing product from the property. So we go through this in more detail in the attachment, but suffice it to say, we've tried to capture a wide range of issues and be very proactive about making the city's expectations clear. There are some areas where we are more restrictive than state law. For instance, the hours of operation section generally coincides with the hours of operation the state allows for cannabis businesses, but it does reduce those hours if those businesses are located adjacent to residentially zoned property. So if you think back to the 6 sites that right now are potentially possible, 2 of those sites, the Helm Center and the McCormick and Sons Mortuary, are located directly adjacent to housing areas. There's a wall between them, but there are houses on the other side of that wall. So we've included reduced hours of operation for storefront retailers in close proximity to residential areas. But suffice it to say, too, that a dispensary would be required to comply with all of the city's requirements. It would also be required to comply with all of the state's requirements. Nothing in the city's ordinance does anything to water down or moderate what the state requires in state law. Wanted to talk briefly about violations and penalties. There are several ways that the draft ordinance proposes to deal with violations. We have the ability to treat violations as either misdemeanors or infractions. Infractions are generally handled through administrative citations or a civil fine process. Misdemeanors, that's a whole separate process, but it includes more higher level fees, and then also, because there are misdemeanors, the theoretical potential for imprisonment. The city would also have the ability to seek abatement of violations as a public nuisance. We have existing public nuisance provisions in our municipal code, as well as state laws that relate to public nuisances. The ordinance includes language that would authorize the city to attempt to recover attorney's fees, court costs, and other expenses of litigation or prosecution from violators. And then separately, I want to point out that the state has a significant amount of enforcement capacity. They have the ability to issue very, very steep fines depending on the revenue of a particular business, but those fines for retailers can range up to $192,000. And then they also obviously have the ability to suspend and revoke state licenses, just as the city would have the ability to suspend and revoke the license or the permit issued by the city. In terms of next steps, so I'm obviously happy to answer any questions about the draft ordinance, but there's an opportunity today for public comments. As I mentioned, there are members of the public joining us remotely that wish to speak as well. There's an opportunity for city council discussion, but I wanted to talk briefly about the 2 paths before you today. Today, the city council can either choose to proceed with adopting regulations, which moves into then a subsequent public hearing and adoption process, or the city council can choose to not proceed with this, in which case this discussion stops today. As kind of a third level of options, the city council can also request additional information from staff or talk about modifying the draft ordinance. If the city council were to proceed down this path, the agenda includes 2 recommendations, A1 and A2. A1 would direct staff to schedule a public hearing. If we received that direction, our intention would be to schedule that public hearing for the meeting on July 19th. The adoption process, as required by state law for modifications of the zoning code, require that public hearing and then a subsequent meeting to consider a second reading of the ordinance and then consideration of adoption. If adopted at that second reading meeting, it would be effective 30 days thereafter. So at today's meeting, if you do wish to proceed down that adoption process, I would specifically be interested in any comments or thoughts that the City Council has on the draft ordinance. As I mentioned at the beginning of this presentation, we anticipate that staff will be fine-tuning that ordinance prior to bringing it back to you. And so we're happy to address anything that you would like us to address in doing so prior to agendizing it for that July 19th meeting. Now, on the flip side, if the council doesn't wish to proceed with adopting regulations and doesn't wish to consider the item further, options B1, B2, or B3 on the agenda would be appropriate actions to take. The difference between taking no action and taking the action included in B1 to direct staff not to schedule the public hearing really has to do with the inability for the item to be re-agendized in a 12-month period if you take that action in B1. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I am going to turn it back over to the mayor now for how you'd like to run the rest of the discussion.
A question, would you repeat that last comment you made about if you reschedule, then there's a...
I'll restate the question.
The last comment you made, what was it?
Yeah, so the agenda includes 3 options for if the City Council does not wish to proceed with adoption. The recommendation in B1 would be for the City Council to actually vote to direct the city manager not to schedule a public hearing. That would limit this item from reappearing on a City Council agenda in the next 12-month period under the City Council's operating rules. If you take the option in B3, which is just to take no action, you can certainly do that, but if a City Council member wishes to agendize it again in the future, there would be nothing preventing them from doing so. So it's really if you wanted to stop the discussion and have it not reappear on an agenda for 12 months, you would do B1.
What if I want to review it? I've had, 2 days and so forth. We haven't had this very long. What if I want to say,
Yeah.
I suggest we table this and bring it back in our next meeting or something like that?
Yeah, so that would be A2.
Start over again.
Yeah, so
You have
A2,
given us a pill to swallow today.
yeah.
Which is
So
maybe
if
digestible and maybe not. I don't know. I have no idea yet.
If the City Council would like to continue the discussion without the pressure of a public hearing, so without the need to really adopt or not adopt a regulation, you could take the action in A2, which would be to provide staff with input and direction. That direction could certainly be re-agendize it at some future meeting. Don't schedule it as a public hearing. We want to talk about it some more. You can ask us to bring back additional information. You can ask us to modify the ordinance, but you can do that under the recommendation in A2. So that's certainly a possibility.
I mean, I'm sorry to take time, but it's very important to me to hear the public.
Yep.
To hear the pros, to hear the cons, to hear the sheriff, and all of this before I make a decision and we make a decision. It is only fair to us and to staff who has been doing all of this. We've had this how long? 4 days, 3 days? And I've tried to swallow what I can, but there's a lot to swallow here.
No, and I appreciate that. That's why this meeting isn't scheduled as a public hearing. This is very intentionally scheduled as an opportunity for the council and the public to weigh in.
I personally don't want to lose the opportunity to hear from everybody here in person, as well as the letters and everything. We got another communication here from some organization which raised questions which are very relevant here. And I don't want to lose that opportunity and have to wait a year to bring this back.
Yeah.
And yet it's alive and it's breathing, and we want to keep it alive and breathing until we've had an opportunity to not only understand it, but to comprehend and to look at all aspects of this. We are a unique city, okay? We're 17,000 people. I have more and more become conscious of the fact that we are a family as a city. Some of us are older than others. Some of us have problems that are serious. but there is a vitality and an energy here in this community that when I take friends in their 40s or 30s, family or friends, and drive them around and let them see what goes on here with those, they are staggered. They have no idea. And to suggest that our alternatives are either to do B1 or B2, whatever it is, and postpone it for a year is not acceptable to me, nor is it acceptable to me to put a gun at my head, if you will, and not let us have an opportunity to hear from the pros, from the cons, and by the pros, I don't mean just those in favor of it, but those who have experienced and so forth. I don't know if any of that makes any sense to anybody.
It makes total sense. I'm sorry.
But
We do have the ability to take a middle ground. We don't have to either approve this today or put it off for a year. Option A2 gives us that ability. So we will.
Do you want a motion now? Because
No,
I'll make a
no,
motion.
first-
No, then let's discuss it because yes, I think we should.
Okay, but you don't need to get wrapped up in procedure because we're going to listen to everybody today.
And that's great. I hope we
And,
can.
and if I certainly would honor your request and probably join it to, if we need more time to look at the details in the proposed ordinance and think about it and bring it back in the near future for another hearing or a
Great.
public
I
hearing.
didn't hear that we could do that.
We can do that.
I will support that.
Yeah, and let me just be clear that I apologize if I mischaracterized it,
Thank
but
you.
the agenda was intentionally constructed in a way that gave the city council very, very broad latitude to do pretty much anything it wants on this subject today. Even if you were to schedule it for a public hearing in the future, I want to remind everyone that that means at least 2 additional meetings after today's meeting before there's a vote to adopt anything. So there certainly is no pressure from staff on the council to make a decision one way or the other today. The agenda has many, many roads for you to go down.
Okay. All right. I think, Councilmember Horn has been carrying water for us on this for a long time. And so she has an introductory statement she'd like to make, and then we'll hear from the public.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. And thank you, Alicia and Chris, for spending all the time you did on this. You did a great job. And thank all of you for coming today. I really appreciate it for being an ongoing part of this story over so many years. This quest to have our own Laguna Woods dispensary started around 2008 with Margot Bauer. Margot, wife of Bob Bauer, the mayor at the time, was an active member of our community, an aquadet, and a happy villager. But Margot got MS, and its impacts were making her life miserable. She was nauseous and shaky and could no longer enjoy her activities, and she became depressed, even suicidal. A friend suggested she try a couple of hits off a joint, a cannabis cigarette, and her nausea disappeared immediately. Margot's quality of life returned, and a movement was born. At a concerned citizens event, Margot spoke out to the community, and a club was formed to educate residents about cannabis and its effects on the body. Margot even grew her own plants on her balcony. At this club, we had experts from Israel and Amsterdam and around the world teach us about research being done in other countries, our own endocannabinoid system and dosing. We learned about the importance of lab testing, not only for dosing purposes, but to make sure contaminants like pesticides or bugs or adulterants like fentanyl were not present. A group was even formed to sit with first-time users so they would be more comfortable and know what to expect. Hundreds attended those meetings. In 1996, Anna Boyce, a senior senator in our senior legislature, wrote and got passed the Compassionate Use Act for medical cannabis. I invited Anna today and hoped she would be here, but she's retired now, but she's very supportive. In 2008, many showed up at City Hall advocating for our own dispensary and did convince our council to permit it. But because it was still not legal except for medical use, no stores would open and our city banned it. In 2016, of course, Prop 64 passed and cannabis was decriminalized statewide for both medical and recreational cannabis. And the two collectives that had been operating in the village then shut down. In 2020, we, the city, had Measure V on the ballot and it passed with a majority. In 2022, another ballot, Measure T for the tax, passed with a majority. Now here we are. In that time, Neomedics, an Israeli company who has clinics in Israel treating patients with Parkinson's and dementia, opened here in Memorial Care. They treated patients using cannabis along with traditional medicine. UCLA has a study on cannabis being a gateway off opioids. UCI is doing clinical trials on low-dose cannabis for chronic pain and another for PTSD. Our residents report a better quality of life using cannabis. Pain can be reduced and controlled safely. Socialization, appetite, and creativity can be stimulated or enhanced, and most can relax, which I think is healthy too, and contributes to better sleep. It's another tool in the toolbox that benefits seniors. Some people feel it has been a miracle for them in treating intractable pain. People like to shop. The smell of different flowers are caused by the terpenes in the cannabis flower. People say it's the smell of different flowers that draws them to the medicine they need and their bodies want. Newer products like patches or edibles and tinctures can be learned about. Questions can be answered. This is a business that has essential workers and products that our residents want and get benefit from. While I know results from one city do not guarantee the results in another city, it can be a helpful example. Since Santa Ana stores have been opened longest in Orange County, I interviewed them. Reviewing the reports in Santa Ana business plans with their building planners show a very positive impact on city finances. Speaking with their chief of police and sergeant, courtesy of Supervisor Vince Sarmiento, Santa Ana's past mayor, yielded the following information. Prior to decriminalization, there were over 100 legal shops and grows in Santa Ana. Now, with 18 permitted dispensaries operating in their city, there are no illicit dispensaries. Calls for service have not increased in 5 years, and the legal dispensaries are operating within their rules and are not a problem. No public safety issues come from them, according to the chief of police and sergeants. There have been a couple of late-night burglaries over the past 5 years of operation, but that happens with other types of businesses sometimes too. The armed security makes sure no one hangs around or uses products on site and controls access inside and outside. I've been to several of Santa Ana's dispensaries and found exactly that. A quiet, spacious, well-run business with knowledgeable and friendly people. No one is hanging around or using products outside. ATMs are inside and credit cards are accepted. Very undramatic. I have been to other types of dispensaries with all kinds of other things going on, restaurants, music, lounges, but that's not what we have in front of us today. This business will add to our city's tax base. While we're not doing this for the money, there are lots of things more money is good for that would benefit our residents. So in conclusion, the negative effects of trespassing, loitering, noise, and crime in the dispensaries are not an issue. The benefits of having legal stores open is a reduction to illicit cannabis shops and will eventually push them out, since few will want to risk the potential contaminants in untested cannabis. We have also seen a citizens' initiative close to being placed on our ballot already, and if that happens, we would not be able to write our own rules like this, others would. So if we pass this today, our residents will finally have the safe, legal, and local access that they've advocated for and voted for multiple times. So I move this ordinance.
Since we have a motion, I'll take a second before we begin our discussion.
Point of clarification on the.
Sorry. Can we just get clarification on the motion? You
moving
said I moved the
A1.
ordinance, but
I wanted to know which one.
we haven't noticed the ordinance yet, and so it's back to the like
Resolution.
A1.
Right,
A1.
I'll correct it to A1.
Sorry. Okay, thank you.
Sorry.
A1.
Where are we?
She just moved number A1, which means schedule a public hearing and move forward. So we can go without a second while we have, well, it's not our choice yet because we haven't heard what everybody has to say.
I second A1.
Thank you.
Yeah, we are. So do we need A1 or A2 to open the public? I don't believe we have to have a motion and second on the floor. We could do that, and we will, okay? Okay, so we'll hold off on the second, and we will start with our public hearing. And I want to be sure that we get to the people who are not present, but I also want to start with who is present. The first person to turn in a request to speak is Maureen Miller. Are you here, Ms. Miller? Okay, please come to the microphone.
Hello.
Hello.
Thank you for holding this. I want to say that the need for medical marijuana in the village is tremendous. I was fortunate enough to be part of a study put out by UCI, and I started the study a year ago, April. I was on it for several months. I have continued to take the Canasutica since then. I have spinal stenosis, and the change was immediate. And this is not high-dose THC. It's a very mild amount with some cannabinoids and CBD. But I have to drive to Santa Ana, which is 30 minutes, spend 5 minutes there to pick it up, and drive 30 minutes back. At this stage of my life, I can still make the drive on the freeway. But I'm not sure in a couple of years if I will be capable of making that drive. So it's far more dangerous to go to Santa Ana than it is to take this. So I hope that you will see the way clear to have this opened while I'm still around to enjoy it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, next is Chow Vangha. Are you here? Thank you, sir.
Good afternoon, Mayor, council members, and staff. My name is Chad Vonka. I'm here on behalf of the committee to support Measure T. It passed with a majority, as you know. We were quite happy to see that. I'm a municipal cannabis policy expert. Prior to COVID, we hosted municipal cannabis policy workshops and worked with dozens of cities, primarily staff members. We didn't get a lot of electeds, but it was primarily staff members of cities that were interested in approving cannabis and wanted to know how to do it in a way that was successful. There are a lot of cities that have approved cannabis and had very disjointed, difficult, or unworkable ordinances. I have not had a whole lot of time. This is an extensive document, but I spent a considerable amount of time. I tried to take time off for my kids for Father's Day, but I did look it over. And I've got to compliment staff, the city manager and city attorney. It was one of the most thorough and thoughtful, proposals that I've seen.
We've come to expect that from our city manager and city attorney.
I can tell you that's not typically the case. Usually the first time something comes to a city council, it can be a train wreck, not necessarily because of staff, but this is not the norm in California. There are only a couple of things in there that I had questions on, and I may have just missed them, one of which was, if you get two applications at the same location, or that would conflict based on the restriction, the 600-foot restriction, which application would you take first? And the other one would be to ensure that cannabis, anybody that you were to license would also be allowed to deliver. And I don't think I saw that in the ordinance, specifically referencing the state license. It seemed to be omitted. I may have just missed that. But I think it's important because what I suspect you'll get is that you'll have a lot of people, residents of Laguna Woods, will go to whatever shop opens up. They'll find what they like. They'll get what they're used to, and then they'll want to just order it and have it delivered rather than having to actually physically go there. So you'd want to make sure that people can do that, and kind of to piggyback on the previous comment, make sure that people that can't travel, can get the medicine that they need. But overall, this is a far better, not that I discounted staff's skill, but it's much better than I expected to see the first time out the gate. I know it seemed to take a long time. It seemed to take a long time to us, and I'm sure to the residents, but these types of resolutions with all of these different aspects, you just can't make them up overnight. Especially in a city like Laguna Woods, which is, I would say, unique globally and clearly very successful. People want to live here. It's not, a place that people go is, I can tell you my city where I live is pretty boring. You've got more going on in Laguna Woods than we do in my city, and we have a lot of families with kids. So I would ask that you schedule a public hearing. You still have the ability with the public hearing. You've got at least 2 hearings, but you've got the chance to take more public input, fine tune it. I'm sure there are a couple little tweaks here and there that staff would pick up later on, but it's very well crafted, and I would hope that you would approve it. And I'd like to just thank staff for doing such a good job, and for you for, having them go through the process to do this. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Mary Sheets.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Sheets, and I'm a resident of Laguna Woods Village. And I'm here today to ask the City Council to consider passing the cannabis dispensary ordinance. This is a personal story for me. On July 4th, 2015, I woke up at 6 a.m. to discover that my husband, lying right next to me, was unconscious. I immediately called 911. When the paramedics arrived, they told me that my husband was gone. He died of a massive heart attack. I was absolutely devastated. My sons came home and helped me with a memorial service, but days later, they had to go back to their own homes, their own jobs, and their own families. 2 months passed, and my oldest son came home to visit me. As lovingly as he could, he said, "Mom, you look like a mess." I told him I hadn't been able to sleep for the last 2 months, and I was mentally exhausted. My coping skills were at zip. He said to me, "Mom, you need some marijuana to help you sleep," and added, "I can't believe that you grew up in the 70s and never smoked pot." He got on his phone, he found the nearest marijuana dispensary, and we jumped in the car and we went. With his assistance, I purchased CBD gummies with hesitation, because like I said, I've never used marijuana before. I took them that night, and I finally was able to get a good night's sleep. It was the first night's sleep I'd had in 2 months. I only used the gummies when I needed them, and now, 8 years later, I barely take them at all. But I needed them at the time to help with my coping skills and to get my life back in order, which it did. So I'm here to ask the City Council to pass the cannabis dispensary ordinance so that when people like me, who may have never used marijuana before, but find that sometime in their life they may need it, that it will be available to them. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Jonathan, I'd like you to come up and speak for the Democratic Club, and then I want to take our remote commenters, and then I'll ask you to speak on your own behalf.
Thank you, Mayor Connors. Council members, I am first going to speak on behalf of the Laguna Woods Democratic Club. by designation of that organization. And then later, and the distinction will be clear, I'll speak for myself, and only for myself, focusing on rather extensive experience with cannabis as medication, recreation, litigation, and subsequently politicization, decriminalization, legalization, and personal organization.
Okay, let's start with the club.
The club, first of all, thanks each of you for your appearances at the club's special luncheons and meetings. And we are now 59 years old and have approximately 450 members. I speak, I think, for unanimity. I cannot remember any negativity toward this position. We first expressly supported a Proposition 64 in 2016. We expressly supported measures V and T. And as a matter of policy, both as a club and our superior Democratic entities, Democratic parties of Orange County and California Democratic Party, we support nationwide, of course, a decriminalization. I'm a resident of Laguna Woods. I read in the entirety of the staff report, and I skim read the proposed ordinance. I think and our position is strongly to urge adoption of the ordinance with whatever tweaks and amendments seem advisable. And I'm not going to get into those, but the important thing is, as Maureen Mailer said, to end the need for those who need medicinal cannabis to have to drive or otherwise get to Santa Ana. Recreational cannabis is the law legal in California. It's the law of California. The state of California has set up a Department of Cannabis Control, I think is the name of it. This 3 other cities in Orange County, Costa Mesa, Santa Ana, and Stanton have adopted a retail ordinance. I think Huntington Beach is working on it. Not sure of the status of that. And of course, dozens and dozens of cities throughout California have provided that service. So I think it implies that we would, and this, we've not said this expressly, but what's implied from our strong urging of adoption of the ordinance is that we respectfully disagree with staff's recommendation that we await the unscheduling of marijuana from the Controlled Substances Act, or hell freezing over, whichever occurs first. And we would say to the Sheriff's Department, thanks for sharing, and again, urge you to adopt it. So I'll be back speaking personally. As I leave, I just want to ask you for a question that I'll answer later. How many states do you think, you might want to just jot this down, how many states do you think of the United States have decriminalized both recreational and medicinal cannabis? And of those, how many only medicinal? And then I'll give you the answer later. Thank you.
That'll give us something to ponder. Or Google.
31, isn't it?
Noel guesses 31. Chris, can you open up the
Yes.
Zoom for people who wish to make comments via Zoom?
We have two individuals who have raised their hands interested in speaking. I'm just going to take them in the order that they appear on the screen. So the first speaker is Candace Hawes. Candace, I'm going to move you into the room. Let me allow you to talk.
There she is.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I think you're muted, Candace.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much. Hello, Honorable Mayor, Council, and staff. My name is Candace Hawes, and I'm the Executive Director of Orange County NORML, which stands for the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws. It's been around since 1970, and our Orange County chapter has been around since 2003. I've been the director for the past 20 years, and I've appeared before the council before, and I've worked with several local cities in adopting cannabis regulations. I also work in the cannabis industry and have been at the Pharmacy Community Outreach and Events Manager, working with the residents of the city for the last 6 years, which has been a great pleasure. First of all, I want to thank you guys and commend you for discussing this ordinance today and all the work from the city staff, which has been immense. Especially that of Councilmember Sherry Horn, who's been working on this for many, many years and hasn't let go of her dedication to the cannabis patients in the city. I am overall in support of this measure, although I do have some thoughts which I'll share in a moment. After the question on the ballot and then the tax measure, it's clear that the majority of the residents want local access to cannabis in the city. Adding commercial cannabis will not be easy, and we thank you for your willingness to guide the city through this process. I would suggest that the council support option 1, a public hearing, but I would also suggest that the council form some sort of committee that can give you feedback on the current draft ordinance. Organizing a committee comprised of residents, city staff, police, and community leadership will allow stakeholders to discuss the many options for regulating cannabis and come back with recommendations for the council. Based on my experience, I would strongly suggest a merit-based application process and that there is no property requirement. First, I'll speak on the property requirement. I would strongly suggest not including a property requirement to apply. There are not that many commercial properties in Laguna Woods, and requiring such would narrow the pool of applicants to only those that have a large amount of capital and not necessarily the best qualified to operate in the city, and actually exclude any Laguna Woods resident from operating a cannabis dispensary. Once operators have been selected, then I would suggest to allow them to arrange for property. On the same note, I would also not support requiring ownership of the building if the dispensary is a building with multiple tenants. Again, going back to the fact that it would only be benefiting those groups with large capital, possibly out of state, not necessarily the best candidates. Although the cannabis industry is currently in a crisis, there are many groups that are interested in operating in the city, and it's up to the council to set regulations that will set them up for success, such as implementing low and reasonable tax rates and requirements for operators. Thank you so much for your time and commitment to this process, and to your residents who have shown from a question and the tax measure that they support cannabis in the city. Thank you so much.
Thank you. What was her title? NORML, National Association for the Reasonable Marijuana Laws? Reform of
National
Marijuana.
Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws.
Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Is there one other, Chris?
Yes, the next speaker, this is a telephone call, so I don't have the speaker's name, but it's going to be whoever's calling in with the last 3 digits, 795. I'm going to move you into the room.
Caller, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hi, Mayor Connors, member of the council. My name is Mike Getlin, and I'm the Director of Public Affairs and Licensing for Nectar Markets. We're a cannabis retail chain. We have 47 operational dispensaries in California, Oregon, and Ohio, and have been operating many of them continually since about 2012. So we have a lot of experience working with local governments and getting through this part of the process. And, the first thing that stands out to me, and I want to echo a comment that's been made a couple of times, and really congratulate your city managers on an extremely thoughtful and extremely thorough process. It's very obvious that this is being taken very seriously, And I think that that will lead to a stable cannabis economy in Laguna Woods. And we're really excited to see Laguna Woods kind of take a lead in this policy area in that part of the county. A couple of quick comments. The experienced operators portion is very important. One of the things that we have seen happen over and over again is that cities put together complex licensure programs only to select operators that either don't open quickly enough to provide the level of service the community wants, or run into significant forecasting and cash flow problems down the road, which causes issues with tax collection and with maintaining the kind of compliance record that public safety needs demand, especially in smaller cities. So from a long-term outlook, I think it's very important to keep a couple of things in mind from the lens of having operated a number of dispensaries for a very long time. First of all, the peak sales and revenue for whichever dispensary is open in Laguna Woods and for the city's tax collection from that will occur pretty quickly. And then those sales will likely decline over time as other cities in the area no longer want to sacrifice tax revenue to Laguna Woods businesses. And so really, over the long haul, the population of Laguna Woods itself can really only support about 2 retail operations by our math. The bigger problem, actually the problem, the consideration that I would look very closely at is that proposing a 10% gross receipt tax and $35 a square foot would take Laguna Woods into a uniquely high tax bracket for cannabis. And if you look at Santa Ana as an example, I believe they actually recently lowered theirs from 8 to 7%. What happens is a couple of things. You know, with the federal tax code, our retailers cannot write off the rent we pay. We can't write off the cost of our staff salaries and the robust benefit programs. So we can't even write off the taxes we pay to your city against our federal tax liability. And so the margins are so compressed vis-a-vis normal retailers that the combination of that cost and the additional compliance costs associated with running cannabis stores and the real estate costs to try and pay large cannabis premiums for the handful of sites that will be available make it very, very difficult to run an economically stable dispensary at those tax levels. So I would strongly encourage you to have some conversations with your colleagues in Santa Ana and ask them why they lowered that tax rate. There may be something we can learn from that. The final comment that I would make in reference to the plan, specifically referencing the Home Depot area, it's extremely unlikely that cannabis businesses will be able to secure leases in large commercial properties because, generally speaking, the bank loans that those properties tend to carry have covenants preventing them from leasing to companies like ours. And so what ends up happening is you may intend very much to put a couple of cannabis dispensaries in specific lots, but accidentally make it so that there are literally no available properties in the city if you're not looking at whether or not those properties have bank loans on them. So I know that's a bit of a brain dump, and I deeply appreciate the opportunity to chat with you guys. And I congratulate you for taking the step to really lead on this in that part of the county. So thank you very much, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you.
His name was Mike, but I did not get his last name.
Can you repeat your full name and the company that you represent, sir?
Yes, my name is Michael Getlin, and that's Getlin, and I'm with Nectar Markets, LLC.
Is that Nestor?
Nectar.
Nectar.
That's what I wrote.
Are you an attorney, sir?
No, sir, I am not. But my wife is a fabulous attorney, and I always wish I had been.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. Are there any other remote commenters?
I have nobody else raising their hand online.
Okay. Jonathan, you want to come up and give us your individual comments?
Thank you very much. I won't go through those rhyming categories that I'm going to address, but
They were well memorized.
let me jump. I won't go chronologically either. I want to jump to the summer of 2009. I had just had cancer surgery. I'm fine, cancer-free now for 14 years. But I did have chemotherapy. And it was cannabis that totally kept nausea away. I think 15 seconds after I felt any idea that nausea was about to occur, a couple of good tokes made it disappear and turned it into the munchies. And I, in fact, gained weight during my chemotherapy. So that's just one thing. The various events that Sherry Horn mentioned and that Candace Hawes referred to really intersect with my life. Let me go to this. As an attorney, as a director of public counsel in the mid-'70s, I represented Normal. We filed suit against the chief of police and the sheriff of Los Angeles and San Francisco counties, Normal versus Gain. It's Charles Gain, I think it's San Francisco. And the cause of action was to declare the criminalization of marijuana unconstitutional under the privacy doctrine that had developed and based on a factual record. We developed discovery through depositions and affidavits of the top experts in studying medical cannabis. So we made one of the first complete records that the bottom line of which was that cannabis was known to be effective for a wide variety of ailments, serious ailments, and was certainly less harmful than alcohol or tobacco or other recreational substances that were perfectly legal. Now, this being the mid-'70s, we lost in the trial court, and the Court of Appeal held that the rational basis of test applied, and it was rational, maybe not good policy, but rational to criminalize marijuana then.
Jonathan?
Yes,
I'm just
ma'am.
going to ask you to limit your comments to like 5 minutes. Okay?
Sure. Oh,
Thanks.
I'll be quick.
Okay.
All right. So, experience with recreation. On the record, it is known that the summer of 1967 was the summer of love. I lived in Berkeley. I clerked for a California Supreme Court justice in San Francisco. We commuted. Our carpool included a future governor of the state of California, whose name will not be mentioned. And as is known, the great bands of that time, Janis Joplin, Country Joe and the Fish, Jefferson Airplane, Grace Lake, Big Brother and the Holding Company, etc., practiced on a great lawn on the bay side of the University of California on weekends, and huge crowds came down. So you can just imagine how my recreational experience played out in those times. I was the organizer of the panel that Sherry Horn referred to in 2008 that included a physician, Margot Bauer, a Superior Court judge, and Anna Boyce and others, and testimony about their personal experiences with the amazing effects of cannabis on very serious illnesses. So those are the highlights that I want to note. It is not helpful that many Laguna Woods residents, and anecdotally, I think they're a huge number. Oh, I was a co-founder of the Cannabis Club, that they have to go to Santa Ana to get their medicine. The last thing I want to cover is the idea that the Federal Controlled Substances Act is a problem. The answer to my question, how many states have decriminalized? 21 have decriminalized both medicinal and recreational. Another 17, that's a total of 38, have decriminalized medicinal, the district plus the District of Columbia and three territories. So the Federal Controlled Substances Act is really more or less a dead letter. There's been extraordinary movement. The numbers I just researched, the last thing I did before coming down here was to check those numbers. There is a movement and there are bills to take marijuana out of Schedule I of the Federal Controlled Substances Act. But administrations from Obama to Biden have said that their policy is not to enforce the Controlled Substances Act, where states are regulating cannabis and its retail sales. The provision that the staff report cited from California law requiring that cities obey the U.S. Constitution and federal laws, that certainly is preempted as a matter of California law by Propositions 215 in 1996 and 64 in 2016, and the state licensing of retail sales and setting up a Department of Cannabis Control certainly takes that out of that provision just as a matter of statutory construction. So that's the long and the short of it. I hope it hasn't been too long of it. And I really urge that you move ahead as quickly as possible to adopt the ordinance and the tax. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For your attention.
Thank you.
Ordinance and the tax.
Okay. Are there any other public comments? Okay, then public comments are closed, and we will start with council comments. Do you want to go first?
Absolutely. I would just want to echo the comments that has been said about the thoroughness of the staff report. Reading through it, it was very, very clear to me that a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of consideration had gone into putting together such an amazing report. So I just wanted to thank our city manager and the staff for doing so.
Okay. Sherry, have you made all your comments? Okay. I'll go next. I fully respect Noel's desire for caution or for due deliberation on this issue. This is something that once we do, we can't undo. And I'm aware that one of the prime functions of our council is to ensure that quality goods and services are available and convenient for our residents. And a number of you have addressed that issue, and that's part of our global responsibility for the people that live here and the people who provide goods and services here. Another of our prime objectives is to ensure public safety. And I have to say that I also had the opportunity to interview the chief of police for Santa Ana and had a good, long, substantive conversation. And it was very interesting to me because he led off by saying that as a law enforcement officer, he does not support dispensaries. But as I talked to him, it turned out that as a practical matter, he has no trouble with the existing dispensaries in Santa Ana. He said that the call, as Sherry noted, he said calls for service haven't increased. He said that there were more burglaries and break-ins at the convenience stores and liquor stores than there were at the cannabis stores, so that they are not a target for crime. since the ordinance, their local ordinance requires armed security, those people make sure that folks don't loiter in the parking lot and partake of the product, or the school kids aren't standing around waiting for someone to come out with their stuff or whatever. So to the extent that higher crime is an issue, my conversation with him put many of my concerns to rest. I do note that our sheriff is still opposed to it, and I do want to find out from him why that is. Normally, if the sheriff opposes something new, it's because they think it's going to create a criminal problem or a law enforcement problem, but perhaps it's only because it's still a federally scheduled substance. So before we're done, I do want to hear about that. There have been a couple of comments about our tax level. And I just want to say that because this is a new thing for our city, one of our other objectives is to maintain the fiscal integrity of our budget and our city. And we really have no idea what our costs from the sheriff are going to be. And we don't have any idea what our code enforcement costs are going to be, because this is a new type of business and it's got a bunch of new kinds of requirements. So I think it's entirely prudent for us to start with a higher level of tax. And if it turns out that things are going smoothly and that we don't need that tax revenue, we can consider lowering it. It's much easier to reduce your taxes than it is to increase your taxes. I would be surprised if our tax rate made it happen that we didn't have dozens of people looking to open 2 or 3 places here in the city. And if it does, then we can relook at it in the future. So my general inclination is to support this, to support moving forward on this, but I want to give deference to Noel and to whatever other tweaks might be made in this ordinance to make sure that we secure the safety of our citizens and the fiscal soundness of our budget. So thanks. Carol.
Thank you. I listened to everyone's comments, and I have to say that I understand all of them. I have no disagreement with anyone on any statement that has been made. I certainly understand if you have a pain and you need something for it, you should have access to that. So that I certainly agree with all of that. I thought that 2 speakers on the that had experience. In fact, we actually had 3, and they did suggest some changes. So I would ask that the way this is worded, it sounds like you're either going to say yes or you're going to say no. And I really think if you forget what it says about not wishing to and just looked at B2, it says that we would request additional information, because I do think there is more discussion about the tax. I think that we heard it from 3, I think, that commented on that, not from individuals, pardon me, people that are in that business. So I think that really needs some consideration. The other thing is there was another person who was, I think that was Candace Hawes, and she also had wanted us to discuss that the dispensaries, the way it was worded, I think her words, and I don't want to misquote her words, I thought it said it would be that you wouldn't limit the dispensary people to be just owners. And there was also a statement regarding large commercial, so there were some limitations on that, and I think those bear more discussion and more investigation. So using all of that, it sounds like we're off to a very good start, and I would suggest that I don't know how to word that one, because it sounds like you take an action or no action, and to continue it to me, requires more time because we need more discussion. And I think those 4 items that I brought up deserve, to me, a lot more enlargement and discussion about how that would work out. So that's how I would see it. And under those conditions, to me, it's B2, but would you address how, maybe I'm taking the wrong number here?
No, I think, honestly, I think B2 and A2 are different sides of the same coin.
Okay.
I would say that it's
Okay.
probably closer to A2. I think for your comments, I think what you would do is you would ask staff to schedule an additional discussion where we could specifically follow up on some of the concerns that were identified during public comments today. We could do that at, say, your next meeting if you wanted to. That's
Well,
absolutely
I
fine.
didn't want to settle. I realize, and I fully understand what you're saying about we don't want to subsidize something. We have to pay for things. Okay, I get that. I'm not against that. But 10% of gross receipts, we had several who commented on that, and I think that needs more explanation and discussion. And so I don't want for us today say, okay, we settled on 10. I know I'm not ready to settle on 10, and I want
Yeah, absolutely.
I think that needs more fleshing out.
Noel, aside from wanting more time, are there specific issues you want to address?
No, I'm absolutely convinced that medical marijuana is a must. I've seen it in my life, not personally, but it's just that simple. Medical marijuana is a must for Laguna Woods, in my opinion. That surfaced a few years ago when as Sherry said, when the Israeli group came in. And I thought to myself at that time, there really is an answer where you have an organization with medical people here in our city, they were in Laguna Hills, where they would, I'm sorry, Jonathan, where they could work hand in glove, not only as a research, but as not a dispensary, but as the medical backbone for the needs that we have as we grow older and have these problems. So we have had, as suggested here, even by Sherry, issues that have been raised, the safety and things like that. Chris and I, to be very honest, I had a conversation about the ordinance yesterday, and my reading through it, not studying it, but reading through it, it was a masterful job, as you had indicated. It really was. My sense is it protects the city. It protects the residents here. And I know in really kind of a dumb way, I'm healthy, I'm good, but I love to paint. Okay?
You're good at it.
I'm an oil painter, and there are no stores in South Orange County anymore where you can go buy your equipment. One's in Yorba Linda, one's in, I don't even know where it is, it's up near Cypress. One is Blix, which is headquartered in Pasadena, and the other's at Warehouse, the art warehouse. Great places. But if I want to get brushes or paints or anything other than by email, which takes forever, and then you get the wrong stuff, I have to drive up there, and it's no fun. It just isn't good, isn't it? So anyway, but issues have surfaced here which aren't going to be resolved really next week in the sense that they have to have the wisdom displayed here and the wisdom displayed there where there is an interchange. Does the language of B2 request additional information from the city manager and direct that his item be continued until such time as the additional information is available.
So I took a stab at just putting together some language real quickly about what Councilmember Councilmember Moore raised. A version of direction that could be provided would be to direct the city manager to re-agendize a discussion regarding cannabis retail sales business regulations for the city council meeting on July 19th, 2023, including discussion regarding the public comments made at today's city council meeting. I would come back with a revised version of the ordinance, but we've taken notes. We could certainly respond to each of the things like taxes and the other items that you raised.
Did you set a date there?
I just said your regular July meeting, but it can be a different date if you
Okay, thank you.
wanted to.
I mean,
Okay.
Okay.
And I think, Jonathan, I think has to be very clear. We're no longer trying to avoid anything here. I think this is a resolution that is going to be voted on, and action is going to be taken. We're about through talking about it, and we're going to have to act.
Okay.
So that would be
Do you want to offer a substitute motion?
I will offer
to
a
his-
substitute motion.
to
I
his
will
motion
offer a
as stated
substitute
by-
as enunciated by our
Okay, yeah.
city manager
Okay.
that
Okay, now we need to get to Robert's rules.
Okay, so we had a motion before public comment opened, but we didn't actually
didn't
get
have
the
a
second.
Vote on it.
Right.
So we would need a second for that motion to require a substitute motion. Otherwise, the motion.
I did second that motion.
Okay.
I seconded it.
So
Okay.
now we officially, just to be clear, that motion is the motion on A1, correct?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
Okay.
Wouldn't we also have, though, not seconded, and then it would die, you go to the one substituted?
But it was second.
So if there had not been a second, the motion would have died. But we have a second. So you have a motion on the floor now.
Yeah, but
You could also now introduce a substitute motion.
I move this substitute motion.
I can read the substitute
Okay. He's
gonna read it.
motion. Direct the city manager to re-agendize a discussion regarding cannabis retail sales business regulations for the city council meeting on July 19th, 2023, including discussion regarding the public comments made at today's city council meeting.
Okay.
And so Councilmember Moore has offered the substitute motion.
Before we vote,
Don't we have to vote on this first?
yeah, before we vote on anything, was there a second on that? Carol, did you make that second?
I did, I made this substitute motion.
I'll second it.
Okay, so
It's
we
been
have two motions that have been moved and seconded. But before we vote on either one of them, I'd like to ask a question of our Chief of Police Services, if you don't mind coming up here. I don't know if you came here prepared to speak on behalf of the Orange County Sheriff.
He's always prepared.
There we go, always prepared. Good afternoon, Mayor, City Council members. So obviously, on behalf of the department, we absolutely oppose having a dispensary in the city. Several reasons that we do oppose is obviously because it's still illegal at the federal level, but a couple and the local level, it's going to definitely increase traffic. You had one of your residents just complain about the traffic and the noise pollution. It will definitely increase traffic, both foot traffic as well as automobile traffic, and not only from your residents, but it's going to be from your neighboring cities as well, and even further south, because you guys will be the only ones in the area with the dispensary. And that is also going to increase the traffic collisions, the driving under the influence, the possibility of both. And so it's going to increase the calls for service definitely for us. We also know that a lot of the crimes that occur at these dispensaries go unreported. Unreported several reasons, obviously, because they don't want to bring attention to themselves from not only the city level, but from the law enforcement level. So that potential is always there and has always exist. We do know the importance of working with the city manager in order to place these ordinances and make sure from the safety aspect that we get things in place that will benefit us from the public safety aspect. We had an opportunity to sit together and had a discussion. Again, we oppose, but we know the importance of public safety, and it's important for us to have that ability to sit with them, talk of what's important, and at the end of the day, to make sure we institute those things, like we mentioned, making sure we have armed security, making sure the signage, it's not inviting to the public, you know, the lighting, little stuff like that, interior, proper cameras, sally port, things that, again, at the end of the day, we're looking in the best interest of public safety. So we appreciate city manager invited us in that conversation, but from the sheriff's standpoint, those are the reasons why we oppose it, but I'm open to questions.
Thank you. Any other questions? I just needed to know the basis for your objections, so thank you.
I have one question.
Go ahead.
In anticipation of this event, have there been any budgetary considerations as to the cost of all of these problems that you foresee as related to our opening cannabis businesses here?
In my discussions with the city manager, one of the things that I know I will do is going to be track the cost for services generated from the dispensary alone. And I asked if there was a chance that maybe either we pass on the cost to the business as to how many calls we get that generates a cost for service, and or based on that, increase my staffing because, or as a result of the amount of calls for service. And if we can't, then I would ask that the city manager consider us looking into increasing my staffing as a result of the increase of calls for service.
How would you do that if you put it on the business, the cost? Has that been done?
Not that I know of, but I just, in engaging with a conversation with the city manager, I thought it was a good conversation for both to entertain those conversations.
In your experience, and in your chief's experience, you are the security of most of South County, aren't you?
As a sheriff's department, we have 13 contract cities. Most are in South County, correct?
All right. Based upon cannabis businesses here, is the sheriff worried that these descriptions you've given about traffic and so forth will occur because we will be the Santa Ana of South County, in other words? You understand what I'm saying?
Yes, and we are concerned, and that's what our concern is with such a small city, that a huge level of influx to the city will occur from not only, like we said, our local surrounding cities, but potentially further south and maybe San Diego County.
Has that occurred in Santa Ana? I know you're not, they're not a contract city, but has that happened in North Orange County?
I can't speak for Santa.
All right, you don't know what's happened up there?
No.
Or in Costa.
But I do know as far as our contract cities, again, you would be the second city that would be entertaining a dispensary within our contract cities, the other being the city of Stanton.
Stanton is in, okay, they are sure.
Well, at the illegal store, they were all out of town people. I observed it, and I knew what age group they're in, and they weren't local. So I think that's some evidence.
Okay.
You know, I would like to speak to the tax issue because this is precisely why we put it at the very highest place that we could. We have a flexible tax and we will be able to lower it, but it's because of the sheriff and the not knowing how many calls for service, if any, if we'll be similar to Santa Ana and have no additional calls for service, or if it will be a big deal. So that's why we made it at the highest rate. But I also would love to have that conversation because I know it's hard on stores, and we'll have to see if any of these things come to pass. So, because it sounds like it's a very well-controlled ordinance, and we will see. But that's why the tax is set as high as it is. So for all of you that have issues with that, these are the exact reasons. But we can adjust it. if we see how things work out. And Chris, I had a question for you. If we postpone this till the July 19th meeting, would that be a public hearing?
I think
No.
we should, yeah.
Well, let me, can I ask just him?
If you wanted, so yes, you could agendize it as a public hearing. I mean, we can certainly do that. That would mean that we would propose an introduction and first reading of an ordinance. So we would come back to you with, instead of a draft ordinance, a proposed ordinance. It doesn't mean you couldn't still modify the ordinance at that meeting, but if that was the direction you wanted to go with a formal public hearing, we can certainly do that in July just as easily as we can agendize just a discussion of it.
Okay, then I'll withdraw my other motion and move A2.
So just to be clear procedurally with where we're at, you had a motion on the floor, then there was a substitute motion to it. So we'll vote on the substitute motion first. If the substitute motion passes, the original motion is dead.
Okay.
So the substitute motion again, and I don't need it to specifically say public hearing unless you wanted to amend the motion, but which actually.
You know,
I'm confused.
I have a concern about the clarity on this because the one you have stated does not include a public hearing. And item A includes a public hearing, A1.
You want a public
And,
hearing, don't you?
and Noel says he's happy with a public hearing as long as he's got
Yeah,
another
yeah, I think a
month to work
public
on
hearing
it.
is good.
Could you amend the substitute motion to include the hearing? Because I think that would be the more
So
logical.
so let me read what I think an amended motion could be, and then if you'd like to amend the motion. Okay, hang on one second.
He's getting ready to set a public hearing for July.
Okay. Direct the city manager to agendize a public hearing regarding cannabis retail sales business regulations for the city council meeting on July 19th, 2023, including discussion regarding the public comments made at today's city council meeting. Does that serve your purposes?
Yeah, one of the things that I have wanted, you have mentioned to us, there are some things you want to change in here
Yes.
that you have to look at. And I think that should be a part of the responsibility of rescheduling this, is you bring to us these other things.
Yeah, so we'll have to. If we notice it as a public hearing, I will bring to you a proposed ordinance.
Okay.
That's going to include both an opportunity for us to talk further about
Okay.
the topics that were raised
All right.
today, but it'll also include another round of revisions from staff, which just for ease of reference, I'll provide to you as red lines to the version you saw today.
I
Okay,
buy
so,
that.
Councilmember Moore has amended her recommendation. I think we need a second for the amendment. If somebody,
Second the amended motion? Okay. It's been moved and seconded.
I'm going to second it if it,
okay, so you've seconded the amended motion. So again, the vote at this point would be on the substitute motion. If that passes, the original is dead, and then we can be done.
So before we vote, I need clarification.
Yes.
I am not clear on what it is I'm asked to be voting on.
Okay.
Is it A1 or A2?
It's neither. I'll read it again. It is a motion to direct the city manager to agendize a public hearing regarding cannabis retail sales business regulations for the city council meeting on July 19th, 2023, including discussion regarding the public comments made at today's city council meeting.
It's sort of a combination of both of them. It sets a public hearing, which A2 doesn't do.
If
But then
there's,
it just gives
I thought
particular language.
A1 said, A1 also addressed a public hearing.
yeah, but this is
We
the,
have one.
Yeah.
Should we vote on it?
this is just the motion on the
I'm
floor.
still asking for
Okay.
clarification.
Okay.
Could we please not move until I'm done, until I'm clear? Thank you.
all right, so what's come out today?
I'm not done, Noel. Can
Oh,
I
I'm
please
sorry.
finish?
I'm sorry.
Okay,
Of
I
course you
wanted
can finish.
clarification on the difference between A1 also directed us to have public hearings, right?
Mhm.
And so does so what is the difference between A1 and A2?
We've
I'm
been-
just asking for
Yeah,
clarification.
sure. So the motion that's on the floor includes a specific point about making sure that we have discussion regarding the public comments today. So as Councilmember Moore noted, there were a couple of topics raised today related to the tax rate, related to the business ownership question. Staff would come back at that meeting in July prepared to address those, either through revisions in the ordinance or through our thoughts on those. So it's kind of a combination of schedule the public hearing, but you've also requested that additional information from staff.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Okay.
And there were issues that you raised that you wanted to bring back to us.
Yes, and I'll bring those back at the July
Those will be
meeting.
brought back as well as issues raised
Yes.
here today,
Correct.
as well, the sheriff included, all of these things.
Yeah, all of it'll be bundled
I mean,
together.
it's
for
going to
the
be
next-
like Christmas Eve. I mean, the present's going to be there, and we're all going to open it together, right?
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. All in favor of the resolution as stated by the city manager, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? You want to abstain? Oh. Okay. But I will say that at our next regular meeting, we will have a public hearing on this, and provided for us before that will be responses to the issues that were raised today as amendments to the proposed ordinance or in regulation, or just as commentary about why things were considered and why changes were made or not made. So everything heard today will be bundled up and redelivered to us with responses in July. And then we can move forward in the direction that we want, whatever direction we want to move, whether it's expeditiously or cautiously, which may be the same thing.
I mean, my sense is we
Okay,
have made
we'll record your abstention. Thank you all. We got through
I
that.
thought you had to explain them.
Now, we do have one final item, which is our fiscal year 23 to 25 budget and work plan. Should we take a few-minute recess so the people that were here for this issue can leave if they want to, and we can all stretch our legs?
Absolutely.
Okay, let's be in recess for a few minutes.
The fire chief may have to leave.
Yeah.
But there's something happening tonight.
That's all for you. Okay, we're back on the air.
You're being very nice. All right.
Okay,
Here we
we're
go.
back in session. We don't have too much to go. We're approaching the home stretch. And Chris, I'd like you to gallop away.
What was it?
We are very much in the home stretch. Let me pull my screen up real quick. Okay, so I do have just a couple of budget items that I want to chat with you about today. The current plan is for the budget to be included in your agenda packet for next Wednesday's meeting. At that meeting, you'll have an opportunity to consider adopting the budget. We are in the home stretch as well of preparing the document, but a couple of things I wanted to talk through today. The first topic is American Rescue Plan Act dollars. So what you'll see on the screen here is, except where you see it struck through or underlined, existing appropriations or allocations from our American Rescue Plan Act funds. So as a reminder, the city received just under $3.8 million. We have possession of all those dollars, so this isn't theoretical money, it's actually in our bank account. There are a couple of changes that we would suggest making. The Ridge Route Drive landscape project is something that was funded out of this. We actually were able to bring that project to completion for less than the allocated amount, roughly $30,000 less. So the allocation was $211,300. We have finished the project. We've paid out final costs. The total cost for that project was $177,671. So that leaves us with that approximately $30,000 to be allocated for some other purpose. We also have this project that was funded through here and also with the OCTA grant, the City Maintained Catch Basins Full Capture Systems Retrofit Project. This project has been around for several years, and unfortunately, I just don't think it's going to get off the ground in its current form. This project is intended to be a part of the city's efforts to comply with the statewide trash provisions, which, despite the name, really relate to stormwater runoff more than they do like conventional trash and waste. In complying with those standards, we were looking at retrofitting each of our city-owned catch basins, of which I believe there are roughly 40, with full capture system devices that would meet the requirements of those state trash orders. It's proving more complicated to do that than we expected, most notably the OCTA grant that we obtained, which is roughly $40-something thousand. We have bid this project out, I believe, 4 times now, and we cannot get the project below 6 figures. It's a combination, I think, of the cost of things, the state of the industry, but in the course of all of this, we've been trying to figure out how we comply with the trash orders in a comprehensive sense. This was always only going to be one part of it. So I think what we're circling now is an opportunity to comply in a different manner. So in other words, these retrofits may not end up being necessary. So our recommendation is that we turn back, decline that OCTA grant, the 40-something thousand, and move this $84,896 back into availability for other projects. And as part of this next 2-year budget cycle, we have a work plan item to figure out that statewide trash provisions compliance concept. The monies that we received from OCTA through that grant program, they offer those on an annual basis. So we can always reapply for them. It's something that they try to spread around to cities. I feel pretty good about our chances to obtain the money again if we need to, but we're running out of time on the current grant. And if the choice is decline it and look at our compliance options, or keep it and shovel in 100,000 plus out of the general fund to make the project whole and make it constructible, I don't think that is the best course of action at this moment. Councilmember Moore, I don't want to.
Yeah, I had a question on
sure.
it. I see the dilemma there.
Yeah.
But I wonder, if you applied again, could you have a greater amount for it? Because you've seen, is that what you're thinking?
Yeah, so I think if we were to, like, let's say we get through our compliance planning and somehow this becomes something we're still thinking we need to do, yes, we would need to apply for more money. I think there's certainly much more money available. This was one of the smallest grants that OCTA awarded, but I think the dollar figure now compared to the actual cost is just, they're worlds apart.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm recommending that we reallocate those unspent balances for the meantime to the City Hall Public Library project. As the project continues to hum along, the longer it takes, we still continue to incur engineering, construction management, inspection costs, architectural costs. We're in also the home stretch on that project, but I think since we have the savings in the Ridge Route Drive landscape project, and from reprogramming the catch basins project, for the time being, I'd like to move that unspent money to the City Hall project. And then once we get to the end of the City Hall project, we would do a similar thing as we're doing with the Ridge Route project. We would release the unspent monies back into the pool of money available to be allocated to other projects. Aside from that, we're recommending 4 of the projects that we've talked about previously be funded with those ARPA dollars. So again, we've talked about these 4 projects in previous meetings, but just in a quick recap, we had talked about the need to make improvements to City Hall's parking lot. That's a couple of things. That's fixing some of the line and grade issues, drainage issues. There's a bit of a berm out there that was created by constructing the City Hall Library project that we'd like to try to level out to provide as flat a surface as possible. The pavement itself is in need of rehabilitation, so we would be repaving. And then something that I know is a priority, we would look at also adding additional trees and landscaping into the parking lot. And then finally, we would also, we would do some underground conduit work while we have the parking lot torn up to lay the conduit to allow for the potential transition from level 2 to level 3 charging stations, which I also understood was a priority in the past. So that project, I think, is a good contender for these ARPA dollars. The median improvements that we talked about on El Toro, these are the 2 medians between basically Town Center and Home Depot Center. I'd recommend funding the design work for those improvements out of this ARPA funding as well. The Ridge Route Drive drainage repair project, we talked about this briefly, but long story short, There is a pipe underneath Ridge Route Drive that carries runoff from one side of Ridge Route to the other side. That pipe is seriously deteriorated. It requires reconstruction, and unfortunately, based on the engineering work that we had done last 2 weeks, it's necessary to open up Ridge Route in order to do it. We were hoping to be able to work within the pipe to repair it, but that's not going to be possible. So this pipe starts on City of Laguna Woods property. That's where the catch basin is. It drains from the City of Laguna Woods side to the Laguna Hills side. Laguna Hills is a partner with us in this project. We have been cost sharing up to this point. Once we figure out what the specific scope of work is, we anticipate that they'll cost share as well. Most of the actual excavation work will take place on the Laguna Hills travel lanes on Ridge Route. But that project, I think, is also a contender for these ARPA dollars. And then finally, we had talked about doing some design work related to planning for the replacement of our existing transit shelters and street furniture. I would also propose to fund that out of the ARPA dollars as well. So with these reallocations and new projects, we would still have a little over $707,000, or I guess just under $708,000 unallocated. But I would continue to expect that number to be somewhat variable, because as projects get completed, if they're not using the entirety of those dollars become unallocated again and available for other purposes. So right now it looks like $708,000 remaining, but in all likelihood you're going to have some amount greater than that, unless all of these projects come in at 100% of the estimated cost. Yes.
I have a question about the unallocated funds. Is there any potential that these funds might be clawed back as a result of budget discussions?
We're going to talk about
in
clawback
Washington?
funds in a second, but no, there's no danger in these being clawed back. We have physical possession of these dollars. They're not going anywhere. What I envision for those unallocated dollars is, you'll note that there are 2 projects in here that are listed as design only right now, one being that median project on El Toro Road. My expectation is that once we do that design work and we come back to the council for buy-off on the project, you're going to need to allocate dollars for construction. My thinking is the construction dollars would come out of that unallocated balance, and a similar situation potentially for the transit shelter and street furniture project. Those are large one-time expenditures. We've been trying to keep the spending out of the ARPA funds to large one-time capital projects as much as possible. You'll note that this is the entirety of what you've budgeted out of the ARPA funds. There's no, paying for staff. There's no office supplies, that kind of thing. We're trying to keep it all on the capital side. So anyway, I wanted to run through this just to make sure there were no objections to conceptually how we've pieced it together.
Chris, and I think you answered
Sure.
part of it about the Ridge Route project
Yes.
and the drainage. So part of it is ours on our side of the street. We're taking care of our financial part, but will we ever be on the hook if the other neighboring city don't?
So my answer is I don't think so. What we plan to do, so right now the City of Laguna Hills is cost sharing with us in the engineering process of trying to figure out what the problem is. So for instance, in the last couple of weeks, we did some work to try to clear out some of the soil that's accumulated inside the pipe to get a better look at things. Several contractors were involved in that to try to get us that view. We ended up sending a camera into it. It was a whole thing. Laguna Hills is splitting that cost with us. My expectation is that we will ultimately figure out what the scope of work is, and then before we pull the trigger on constructing it, we would get an agreement with Laguna Hills that we're splitting that cost. And that's how, for the purpose of the budget document, that's what we're assuming. This $273,000, that is 50% of the midpoint construction cost estimate for the project right now. The other 273 would be budgeted out of the general fund, but not with the expectation that the city would just outright pay that money. That would be the budget to allow Laguna Hills to pay us, and then us to have a budget to actually build it. We plan to be the lead agency on it, but quite candidly, like, Laguna Hills needs this repair as much as we do. So I think we're likely to be equal parties in it, but we'll get back to you if that proves to not be the case before those construction dollars are spent.
Thank you.
All right, and then the second thing I wanted to talk about today was, and this is to the mayor's comment about clawback funding. The city is due to receive $200,000 from the Coronavirus Response and Relief Supplemental Appropriations Act of 2021. That's a piece of federal legislation that provided COVID-related funding for a variety of things, but including local pavement projects. So the city's allocation based on population through the OCTA administered program for this funding is $200,000. We have been notified that we and 23 other cities are at risk for losing this funding. It is unobligated at this point. There were some things that the State Transportation Commission needed to do and OCTA needed to do. Those haven't happened yet, so even though they've been allocated to the cities, we don't have possession of this money, and it hasn't been officially, in the eyes of the federal government, obligated. HR 3746 was the debt ceiling bill. It's also called the Federal Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2023, but that debt ceiling bill clawed back a number of COVID-related dollars. OCTA has notified us that they believe that this funding is at risk for clawback, but unfortunately, we're not going to have a clear answer on that until very likely the day of our council meeting next week, when you're going to be asked to adopt a budget. So what staff plans to do, we don't plan to change the projects that are programmed for the year, but we do plan to make the assumption that we're paying for them out of existing transportation dollars and not out of this coronavirus funding. It's our practice in the budget to not budget soft dollars. It is definitely soft dollars if we don't have an obligation for the money and the federal government has told us they think they're taking it back. So we would budget out of the city's existing transportation dollars for the pavement management project we plan to do anyway. And if this funding isn't clawed back, we will come back to you and ask you to reallocate dollars so that we spend this instead of the money that we've budgeted. But I just wanted to highlight that this is the only funding that we believe is at risk based on that debt ceiling deal and the clawback on the federal government's part. That's it. I promised a short budget thing. I just wanted to talk to you about those before next week. But as is the case previously, there's obviously an opportunity for public comment. And if council members have any other budget-related thoughts, we plan to publish the budget either Friday, or if we, for some reason, if we're not done with the budget on Friday, we will publish the agenda packet over the weekend and get it to you. But the idea is that we've talked about most of the new spending priorities and things. There really shouldn't be anything that is surprising to you in the budget document. It's more just putting it in words and putting it together. So, well, I appreciate that. I can tell you that for sure we have a balanced budget that we're proposing next week. It will undoubtedly be amended several times during both fiscal years, but I feel pretty good about the budget. I appreciate your time in these budget discussions. But I think certainly, as has been the case in the past, especially on the capital side, we have a pretty aggressive schedule of projects. But thankfully, plenty of funding to bring those to fruition. So anyway, that's all I have, unless there's any comments.
Any comments? Okay. Okay, we're closing in now. We're coming to our city council reports and comments. And the first thing to report is the Greenbelt Authority. Did they have a meeting lately?
Oh, sorry, no, our next meeting is July.
Okay. And next we have the Fire Authority, and our fire.
I wasn't going to say anything, but I want Chief Hunter to come up.
What a sweetheart, he stayed.
He's been sitting there quietly.
I know.
I know we're all tired. I want him to tell you what's going to go on in about a half an hour.
Oh.
And if any of you would like to go, he will make sure that you get there. All right?
Do they have food there?
What's happening in half an hour or an hour? I'm not sure which one.
So in about an hour, we're going to graduate a fire academy. So Academy 57 is going to graduate at our headquarters. And it's 34 recruits successfully completed our fire academy. 16-week fire academy, very rigorous training, didactic, physical, just all-risk training that we offer to prepare our firefighters before they come out in the field. So they're going to be there tonight. They're going to put on a show, graduation, to show their families and their friends what they've learned and their experiences in the fire
think you need to turn that on.
Yeah, because I certainly couldn't hear a word you said.
We're hearing it, but it's not. Sorry about that.
Yeah, use your field voice now. Forget the mic. How many are graduating?
30.
34.
How many were in the entering class?
Wow.
So it's a small class, really, isn't it? At 34. And this was what, 1,000 applicants or more than that? Do you remember how many there were?
I don't remember how many applicants.
Do you know how many women are in the graduating class?
I don't.
Okay.
Hang on, so.
And council member, I'll repeat the question from another council member. Will there be food?
There will be food and drinks and sweets and all kinds of good stuff.
Wow.
Yeah. Anyway, and then they're on probation for what, 1 year?
So they will be on probation for 1 year, and one of my many responsibilities is staffing for the whole fire department. So I've finished placing all of them in their probationary spots. And then we have another class that was out before them, so every 6 months they rotate.
And they're not all babes out of college either. Some of them are firemen in other areas or on this class. I don't know, but
Yeah, this class, I think we had about 10 that were firefighters somewhere else.
Okay.
We call them lateral firefighters. And then the other
did you
24
put any in 22?
Did we put any at 22?
Yeah, any
There's
of
a
them assigned
couple.
at 22, do you know?
There's a couple at Station 22. We have a couple at Station 19, the surrounding area. This is very good opportunity for our new firefighters to get experience at these stations because they're very, very busy.
Very active.
They get a variety of calls.
We're
so we try to get them here.
So anybody in the community should keep an eye out for some fresh-faced young fire people coming to their calls.
Thanks, Chief.
Thanks for
You're welcome.
staying through all this.
No, good stuff. Thanks.
At the end of your report?
That's it.
Okay. Mosquitoes. Oh, library.
Now, I thought I had something I was gonna do it next time, right? So I
You can do it this-
Leave everything and do it next time.
Okay.
Because we're late.
Okay. Now mosquitoes.
Did you have a video, Chris? You have a video from Vector?
Sure. I think the next one is the toll roads. I just want to say that we passed our budget this in June, and this is for the 73 road, and their revenue is expected at 190 million, and they expect to spend 136 million, and the surplus will be used to fund our capital projects and to pay down our bonds. We've already reduced our debt by 1.3 billion. So by reducing our debt and increasing our revenues, our bond ratings go up. And once our bond ratings go up, then when we roll over the bonds that have matured, we get the money at a much lower
Do you know what
interest
our
rate.
ratings are? What those ratings are? Are we a
I
B,
believe
C?
they're A. I don't think they're A plus
A?
yet. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, they're investment quality now. They started as junk bonds because they were unsecured by anything except potential toll revenues. And the other thing is that we're on a search for a new CEO, and we will be interviewing next Wednesday. And I'll have to duck out of the interviews to come here and pass the budget. Next report comes from a watershed.
That's the one I was giving next week.
Okay. And do you have anything to say from the bridge builders? They've been doing a good job.
There has not been any activity this past month, so no.
Okay. Okay.
The vector.
Is Vector queued up? Okay.
Yes.
The video shows why we do what we do at Vector. I was not at the last meeting, but here's this video.
What's the magic word, Aaron?
Kimberly King interview, take one. hardly anybody knows that I have a problem if they didn't know me beforehand. But I look normal. I act normal. But I'm not normal.
The neurologists say that I'm probably about as good as I'll ever get, which means I'll always walk with a cane. If I fall down, I have to have somebody help get me up. I won't ever be strong enough to lift my kids.
I have 3 children, and no. I have 4 children, 3 that are alive and 1 that's dead. Adriana was amazing. She could light up any room. She was a smile bug. She was just learning to ride her bike. She was super excited about entering kindergarten and being able to ride the yellow bus. On the 5th day at the hospital, she was pronounced brain dead. And then she died in my arms at 10:39. And that was it. A mosquito killed my child in less than 6 days.
My son and I were playing out in the front yard doing some work. We started getting eaten up by mosquitoes. Probably about 3 days later, I started feeling like I had a bad case of the flu, and that's kind of when the nightmare started. I can very clearly remember when the doctor came in, because I couldn't talk. All I could do was listen. She told me I had West Nile virus. I had no idea that it existed. I had no idea that it could do what it did to a human being. And I certainly had no anticipation that I would spend the next year of my life in a bed and learning how to redo things that my children had recently learned how to do.
When I was admitted to the hospital in Bloomington, my wife Roberta called my brother and said, "If you want to see him before he dies, you better get on the next plane and get here." My legs were paralyzed, my arms were paralyzed. To stand up was excruciatingly painful. It almost killed you, it was so painful. I was out of work for 7 months. When I went back to work, I could see patients for 1 hour, and then I had to go back home, go back to bed. I wasn't sure I was going to survive. I wasn't sure I was going to be able to go back to work at all. So the fact that I'm able to go back to work, even if I can't do everything I used to be able to do, is really a blessing.
I lived in the hospital from August 29, 2009 to February 28, 2010. I did another 6 months of rehab, relearning how to walk and swallow and speak.
People that get sick tend to have permanent, lifelong problems because of the illness.
Only one of my lungs works, so I breathe at about 50% capacity. I have nerve damage throughout my extremities, which means I can't run. I can barely climb stairs.
It's the sort of thing you never think will happen to you. I was perfectly healthy, it happened to me.
It's non-discriminatory, and once you get it, you've got it, and there's nothing out there that stops what it does to you.
Mosquitoes aren't mere annoyances anymore. They have devastating effects, physically, emotionally, financially. Like for us, in 6 days in the hospital, it was $180,000 out of pocket.
The economic impact of one person getting West Nile and going through what I went through is pretty tremendous. And it's such a simple thing to take a few steps to avoid.
We eliminate any breeding grounds. Mosquitoes only need 1/8 of an inch of water to breed in.
2 drops of water in a bottle cap or an overturned flower pot or something in the yard, that's where they breed. All you can do is protect yourself.
Burying a child is the hardest thing in the world. How wonderful she would have been, what a great big sister she could have been. She was riding in a hearse to her final resting place, rather than being on the big yellow school bus for her first day of school. She never got to experience life. I have a very strong faith that God only takes the best. He only gives you what you can handle. And he gave me a purpose in life.
people really don't realize the potential problem for infectious diseases like West Nile until it comes home to them.
You're either lucky like me, and you get to live like this for the rest of your life, or you're unlucky and you're dead.
Just because it doesn't happen to everybody doesn't mean it's not a big deal. Just because it hasn't happened to you yet doesn't mean it's not going to happen to you next year.
My name is Sean Lloyd. I'm a business travel attorney.
My name is Kimberly King. I live in Pembroke, Massachusetts.
I'm Dr. Don Reed. I'm a colorectal surgeon in Medical City, Dallas.
My story is real. The other victim stories, they're real. Is it fearful? Yes, but it's real.
You have to be vigilant. We have to take public health measures to try to prevent this disease from occurring.
It's important for the public to play their part too and take personal responsibility. It needs to be done.
Thank you, Chris. So it's just really important to look around your manor, make sure there's no water in little plant saucers or anywhere, and a crumpled up potato chip wrapper even. So just really got to tip and toss that water and stay safe.
Thank you. Okay, that completes our calendar today. I'd like to thank all of the council members and staff for your patience and for your thoughtful comments. And as we adjourn, I'd like to adjourn in recognition of Juneteenth, June 19. That's the day 2.5 years after the Emancipation Proclamation was signed, when Union troops arrived in Texas and brought enforcement of the proclamation with them, freeing the last of the Confederate slaves. This marks a step in our journey to move to a more perfect union, and we will continue our efforts to move forward. So, we are adjourned. Thank you all. Good meeting.